Quickly, I know we're going to go off piece a little bit on the screen.
We're now live again. So yes. We've all had our lunch, and again, John is with us. So we're not quite there yet. There's a few more minutes, but we will do our best to start on time and try and stick to the time as much as we can this time, isn't it, Stuart? Yeah,
well, we're getting used to this. Thomas and I have never, I mean, we've done plenty of stand-up presentations where you're live in an auditorium full of people, but nothing virtual in this sense. So we kind of we did try and kind of script ourselves. So we had a few talking points, but also so we kind of made sure we were including all the same information. And I think that what happened this morning was we didn't really take into account how long it was going to take to go through those points. So all the talks for today, it's worth noting, they're all pre-recorded, so we know how long they are. So normally when you're doing a presentation, it's the speakers that go on for too long, but we've already had the chance to edit them down. It's us that's talking for too long. So it's entirely hold hands up. It's our kind of issue to keep to time. What we're going to try and do this afternoon, though, is try and be as punchy as we can be. It's perhaps worth, just before we do go live, we're going to try and get we are live, but before we kind of go to schedule, we're going to start properly, as it were, at 2 o'clock. So a few more minutes. So if anybody is already tuned in, they've got perhaps a couple of minutes to go and get a cup of tea, pop out to the loo, do whatever they need to do before the first talk comes on.
Stuart, it's that virtual walk back to the auditorium, that we had last year. So And hopefully everyone has enjoyed the virtual lunch that we provided. I hope it's as nice as it usually is.
Well, I think this year we managed to cater to all of the variety of dietary requirements. I think everybody was satisfied on that particular point. I don't think anybody was eating anything they were allergic to this time around. I think we've got a really busy sort of session this afternoon, haven't we? It's going to be really good. There's really interesting points coming up. We had a great session this morning. Now, it's just worth saying as well, that morning session, that's still live on our YouTube page. Now, I'm trying to watch the YouTube channel next to me. I can't see if we've got any viewers at the moment. But
we've got a few viewers, actually, Stuart. I've just had a look. We've got about 12 viewers on this channel. So this one's the Archaeology Day. So what happens is, because we stopped, the morning session stopped, so basically we've got two versions. So I've actually put on the morning session of Bore, and I will do the same with the afternoon one. So it looks a bit confusing. So it's the Archaeology Day one, but obviously those watching are obviously aware of that already. So we're not quite there yet. We're almost at 2 o'clock, and I will then start. Okay, here we go. So we're back to our afternoon session. So croeso yn ôl i'r sesiwn Pnawn. Gobeithio rydych chi gyd wedi cael cinio da. Gobeithio chi'n mwynhau y cinio virtual ar ei ni darparu flwyddyn yma. A gobeithio ydych chi gael siawns i wylio taith tywys o gwmpas Awdurdod. Os mae gennych chi unrhyw cwestiynau amdan hwnna, gyrwch nhw iddyn ni trwy'r chat neu trwy'r e-bost. So archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. Felly, na I pasio I Stuart I croesawu yn Saesneg.
Brilliant, thanks, Thomas. Yeah, so welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to this afternoon session. I mean, I don't know whether it's worth a very quick reintroduction. Anybody that's joining us this afternoon that wasn't with us this morning, very quickly, and you can probably see our names. It's sort of featured down here somewhere. My name's Stuart Berry. I work for Pnawn, which is a community charity here in Pembrokeshire. Most people in Pembrokeshire will be familiar with it. Tomos is community archaeologist at Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, and has a wonderful remit working around all the archaeological sites in the only coastal national park in the UK. So, I mean, I think he's got a fantastic job, and it does a great job of it. So, this is an annual event for those who didn't tune in this morning. We obviously get a bit of background. This is an annual event, but this is the first year we're doing it virtual. So we've got a great afternoon coming up, and we hope that you've all had the chance to look at the virtual tour that we put up over lunchtime of Awdurdod, the Iron Age, the Hill Fort. Fantastically produced video there. What we're asking is that we've got a few presentations and talks coming up in the afternoon. If you've got any questions or comments that you want to be included in the live Q&A that we've got with all the speakers at the end of the session, please do pop it in the comments bar on the YouTube channel, or you can email archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. Now, there's some really interesting talks coming up, so please do let us know what your thoughts are. Again, as we said this morning, if you are watching, please do let us know in the comments bar. Let us know where you are, who you are, what your link to archaeology in Pembrokeshire is. please do give us some feedback. It's good to know that what we're doing is being seen by people. So yeah, I mean, it's looking like, I'm just having a quick look now at YouTube. We've got, there's about 60 people out there watching us live, Tomos. So I think you're going to introduce the first session, aren't you?
Yes, I am. So, well, first, I'm just going to, well, I'll do the Welsh bit just to give you a little bit of flavour of the content this afternoon. So, mae'r sesiwn y pnawn ma, maen nhw'n symud I ffwrdd o'r pynciau mwy eang fel Covid-19 a cynrychiolaeth arbenigolyd bore yma, oedd yn diddorol iawn. Felly, pnawn ma, da ni'n mynd I glywed amdan prosiectau a gwaith ymchwil sydd yn mynd ymlaen mewn perthynas archeoleg yn ardal Parc Cenedlaethol. Eto, fel dyn ni wedi sôn, fe gennym ni sesiwn cwestiwn ac ateb fyw tuag at diwedd y sesiwn yma. Da ni'n gobeithio gorffen am 4, felly gobeithio fy ni'n gallu cadw ar amser tro yma. Ond os mae gennych chi unrhyw cwestiynau am unrhyw un o'r sesiynau, gan gynnwys yr taith tywys o ddych chi'n gallu gwylio amser cinio, gyrwch hein iddyn ni trwy ein channel neu postiwch fo i'r e-bost archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. A mae werth pwysleisio eto I rai o ddim yn gwylio bore yma, mae'r diwrnod am ddim. Felly, os un peth sy'n ni hoffi, os da chi'n gallu, ydy rhoi roddion i'r ymddiriedolaeth y Parc Cenedlaethol. A mae'r link yna ar ein channel ni, a gobeithio bydd Sophie digon garedig I roi o ar. So, Stuart, I'm just mentioning, there's one bit that's actually not on the script, so I'll just mention in case you didn't pick it up. So, I just mentioned that for those joining us this afternoon, the event is free of charge. But we would encourage people, if they can, to donate to the National Park Trust. And the link is on the YouTube channel. I'm hoping Sophie will be kind enough to put that link on. So if you can, please do donate to the trust.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks, Tomos. Yeah, so moving on to the first session of the afternoon. This morning's sessions are all about some subjects like looking at how the sector, the archaeological heritage sector more broadly, been impacted by COVID-19, and a few other the salient issues that have been impacting the sector in 2020. This afternoon, we're going to be looking at some projects specific to Pembrokeshire, which will hopefully be of tremendous interest to not only people that live and work interested in the sector in Pembrokeshire, but also to a much wider archaeological audience. And I understand we've got people from across the UK watching us. I know we did this morning, so we're very grateful to have that wide audience. That's the joy of being virtual, I suppose. So. First session that we've got this afternoon is from Dr Toby Driver, the Royal Commission. He's going to be talking about the work of the Cherish team in the Castlemartin area. Now, as Tomos mentioned, if you've got any questions or comments, you can pop them in the comments bar. We've got archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk as the email address if you wanted to drop an email with a question in. Obviously, anything that we don't get around to answering in the Q&A today, there might be a lot of questions. We don't know. There might be a lot of questions. We don't get time to answer them all. We will try and get back to everybody at some point. Maybe not today, but we will try and get the various kind of presenters to respond to all those questions in one way or another and try and come back to people. Please do send us your questions for these talks. So as Thomas mentioned, it's a free event today, so please do donate. The link is going to be up in the comments there. And I think also the other thing to mention, Thomas, is there's a feedback form, isn't there? So because this is the first virtual event, we are asking for feedback. It's really useful to know. Obviously mindful that this year's catering has been perhaps better than ever, but yeah, it'd be useful to know everybody's feedback on the other aspects of the conference. So we'll put the link to the feedback form in English and in Welsh in the comments bar. So I think are we moving straight into Toby's talk, Tomos?
We can do. Do you want me to introduce it in Welsh before we start? Yeah. So fel mae Stuart di sôn, mae Toby Driver yn mynd o'r Comisiwn Brenhinol yn mynd I sgwrsio ni amdan gwaith diweddar prosiect Cherish ac yn penodol ar ardal Castlemartin. Mi fydd o hefyd yn pwysleisio rai o'r technegau digidol mae nhw wedi bod yn defnyddio I fonitro'r safleoedd. So if I can ask John just to play the film for us.
Brilliant.
Right, I'm just going to share my screen. There we are. Hello, and welcome to Stacks, Cliffs and Cauldrons, a talk by me, Toby Driver, about some recent survey work we've been doing on the Castlemartin Training Area in Pembrokeshire. I work with the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales, based in Aberystwyth. I also work on the Cherish Climate Change and Coastal Heritage Project with my colleagues Louise Barker and Dan Hunt. And the title of the talk conveys something of the spectacular coastal scenery we've been lucky enough to work in amongst this summer. So over the next half an hour or so, I'll tell you about some of the new survey work we've been doing in August this year, looking at 5 coastal promontory faults in the South Pembrokeshire coastal cliffs and the Carboniferous limestone scenery of the Castlemartin Training Area. And we'll look at how the Cherish project is approaching the recording of these incredible sites, but also how it's tackling issues of climate change and coastal erosion. You'll see 4 of the 5 sites here. One of the most famous amongst them, Flimpstone Bay Promontory Fort, upper left. Then we have Croxy Dam near Flimpstone in the centre. Lower left, Buckspool or the Castle in the east of the range near Govern's Head. And then Linney, lower right, a Linney Head Promontory Fort right out in the west of the Castlemartin Training Area near Freshwater West Beach. Now on the right is my colleague Louise doing some surveying this summer. Over the summer period, we surveyed nearly 3 kilometres of coast with drone photogrammetry, recording over 3,000 new images so that we can pop up new 3D surveys and 3D models of these sites, and also carried out new topographic surveys of these promontory faults. So I work on the Cherish Climate Change and Coastal Heritage project, begun in 2017, running for 6 years until 2022, and we've just had an extension until 2023 as well. And we can see here the 4 partners, the Royal Commission, ourselves on the right there, working with Aberystwyth University, Geography and Earth Sciences, and our colleagues in Ireland, the Discovery Programme, and the Geological Survey of Ireland. So it's an Ireland Wales project with 4 main driving themes you can see there on the left. We're looking to reconstruct past environments and weather history. We're looking to discover and map and monitor heritage on the coast edge and also under the sea. And then the lower 2, the ones that we're more concerned about here with the Castlemartin survey, the need to raise awareness about knowledge and data gaps. Knowledge is often poor in the very coast edge, these more remote rural parts of the Irish and Welsh coastlines. This is where a lot of the work we need to focus. And we're also particularly establishing new and accurate methods of recording the coast edge. Previously, really good topographic data, cartographic data has been lacking in these remote parts of the Welsh coastline. And we're improving that now with better recording to help us monitor cliff loss and change into the future. Within the Cherish project, we've really developed a toolkit approach to prospecting for and surveying archaeology. So we're trying to hit the coast edge and the inshore waters with everything that we've got. And this spring, we had a brand new graphic done of our toolkit approach here by Caris Tate, an illustrator, and it really sums up the way that we're tackling the coast edge of West Wales and eastern and southern Ireland. And we're actually employing all these techniques you can see in the diagram, from number 1, airborne LiDAR survey, airborne laser scanning, number 2, drone survey, number 4, aerial survey, which is my day job at the Royal Commission. Down to number 11, we've been doing some offshore survey, or the Geological Survey of Ireland has been surveying the inshore waters of Wales this summer. What we're looking at on the cliff edge there, the rope access, number 7, the topographic survey, number 5, the geophysical survey. These are all techniques we're combining in the coast edge of Wales, particularly the laser scanning, the drone photogrammetry for the Castlemartin region. Now, Pembrokeshire is famous for its coastal promontory faults, even back to Lawes's quote in 1880 there about these wonderful coast edge with these windswept promontory faults around it. And we have around 60 coastal promontory faults around the coast of Pembrokeshire. And on the left, we can see one of our project maps from the Cherish project of our key baseline study sites in Wales. You can see we're surveying quite a few coastal promontory forts around the coast. Up in the north, Dyfed, and then midway down, number 8, Castlemartin and Ceredigion. And then in Pembrokeshire itself, Pentyrrau or Cyfle promontory fort near St David's, where we should have had a excavation this summer, but was put off due to COVID. And we can see right at the bottom, number 13, Flintstone Bay promontory fort. So these are our baseline study sites, where we're doing the most work to monitor erosion and fix baseline recording for the future. Now let's go back to prehistory for some of these sites. Let's consider Pembrokeshire's role in these busy international seaways which existed long before the Romans came to Britain. And we can see this yellow line demarcating what I call the Celtic Sea archipelago. These are regions of southwest Britain and Ireland where promontory forts, coastal promontory forts, were really a way of life. In Wexford and Waterford, Southern Ireland, Pembrokeshire in Wales, and then Cornwall, of course, as well, we have a profusion of coastal settlements. And now we know back as far as 325 BC, we had Greek navigators like Pytheas sailing up from the Mediterranean, circumnavigating Britain, talking about the Cornish tin trade, talking about trading and meeting with locals in Wales and the Isle of Man and Scotland as well. So these coastlines have been well travelled and well visited for millennia. And we can see the quote, you can read it as I talk, from Strabo from 7 BC, drawing upon some of these earlier Greek and Roman navigators, talking about the products that Britain has, the grain, the cattle, the gold, the silver, and the iron. And you can be sure that Pembrokeshire would have been a very important and well-visited place. 300 BC, 200 BC, 100 BC, a long time ago, it would have been well connected with the wider maritime world. Closer to the present day, we have problems of erosion at some of these coastal promontory forts, particularly on the limestone, where we can have many years of stability, but then spectacular collapses. And here we can see a large cliff fall at Flintstone Bay promontory fort. It happened around 2014. You can see lower right my air photograph in 2014 showing this fresh cliff fall on the isthmus at Flintstone Bay, losing about 5 meters of coastline. And more recently, upper right, we've had quite a lot of erosion on the footpath entering Flintstone Bay promontory fort at Cadw, and the National Park have erected fences now to try and prevent people walking there. But these are quite fragile sites. And we saw, of course, the storm Ophelia in 2017, the collapse of part of the Green Bridge of Wales as well, that great natural arch down here. So wind and rain and storms are taking their toll on these exposed promontory forts. There's plenty of work to do, and plenty of things that we can do with modern archaeological survey on these coastal sites. And everybody talks about doing drone surveys nowadays, which is part of the work that's really central to our new surveys. You see Dan in the photograph here. Dan and myself are qualified drone pilots for the Cherish project in Wales. But it's not just a case of going out and flying a drone in coastal Pembrokeshire. We have to abide by the law and the regulations. We have a new drone users code of practice in Pembrokeshire. And all the way through the year, we must be mindful of nesting birds in the cliffs. During the summer months, spring and summer months, we have the choughs there on the bottom of the picture. And then from August and September onwards, we can have pupping seals in some of these secluded Pembrokeshire coves. So we work very closely with Natural Resources Wales, the National Park to get clearance for our drone service before we go ahead. But the results can be spectacular. Here we have Cyfle promontory fort near St David's in a new 3D model that Dan's launched on Sketchfab, and you can find that on our Cherish Sketchfab account. It's also not just Cherish working in the coast edge in Pembrokeshire. There's lots of other people working in the coast edge, and particularly last year, or the year before, 2019, the Diwrnod Archaeological Trust was excavating again at Pentyrrau promontory fort near Solva, the next fort along from Cyfle. They had some great results from that first years of new excavations on the entrance passageway. You can see a photograph of the entrance passageway under excavation there. And then we have Cherish working with the Diwrnod Trust on a new drone survey of Pentyrrau. You can see our Sketchfab model, the promontory fort there, and a new topographic survey of the earthworks as well. So this is a complex, monumental promontory fort, and there's so much coming up from the interior to show us how people lived here in pre-Roman times. So turning to the subject of the talk and the promontory forts of the Castlemartin Peninsula, back in August, the very first piece of field work that the Royal Commission did, since lockdown started in March, was this piece of work at the promontory forts of the Castlemartin range. We have a brief window of opportunity on this live firing range in August to do field work. Particularly Linny Head out there on the west is in the live firing area, not normally open at any time of year. And then running down the south coast, we have Flintstone Bay, Croxy Down, a new promontory fort at Crickmile Down, and then Buckspool the castle. So we can see these promontory forts on the south coast. And these are the focus of our week's recording project to really get those baselines in place. And the far west first, we start with Linny Head Camp, way out on its own really, just around the corner from Freshwater West. A very interesting promontory fort with massive banks, about 3 to 4 meters tall in places, cutting off the promontory. And upper right, you can see an air photograph of the promontory enclosure. The next promontory on from Linny Head has this tiny little enclosure on it. And it seems to be common of the sort of pairing of these coastal sites we have around the Pembrokeshire coast. As it's in the live firing area, Linny Head is covered in rounds of dummy and live ammunition. You can see a tank shell in the middle photograph there. And this is why we have to have stringent controls with the military, proper briefings, and they even come out and see what we're doing sometimes. There's Stephen in 2018 coming to see us on our survey of Linny Head then. So it's an interesting and dynamic environment to be working in. Now, back in 2009, my colleague Louise Barker did a big topographic survey of Linny Head. This is providing a great comparison for the work we're doing now. It seems to have a number of phases. Number one there on the plan, you can see an inner enclosure, an earlier enclosure on the very bluff of the promontory. The next phase seems to be phase two, the construction of these great ramparts across the promontory with a main gateway, which at number 3 was augmented with a new hallmark, a walled bastion to protect this gateway, and then new outer ramparts as well. And you can see a photograph of the walling on that hallmark in the middle photograph on the right. Number 4, and photograph lower right, is this weird crossbank. This cuts across the phase 2 and phase 3 ramparts and suggests potentially a response to cliff collapse. Just at number 4 is where the cliff edge is eroding, and this rampart cuts across and sort of provides a new end to the promontory fort. And it may be that in the face of collapsing ramparts, that the Iron Age builders built this new crossbank to protect the interior of the fort. Maybe an early response to climate change. So we're out this summer. This is my colleague Dan flying the drone, doing photogrammetric recording of the slice through the ramparts we have at Linny. You can see on the top, the upper rampart is cut through dramatically, and then dropping down, lower down, you have a cross section of the rock-cut ditch. You actually see the infill of the rock-cut ditch there, lower down. So we have a rare chance to get a cross-section of an Iron Age defence without even excavating it. So we're doing a detailed photogrammetric model of that at Linny Head and improving our record of the whole promontory fort. During that week in August, we also did our first proper visit to Buckspool Camp, also known as the Castle, down near St Govan's Head. Now, Buckspool, a very fine promontory fort from the air, but less visible, quite inconspicuous at ground level. From the air, we can see the defences there. On the outer side, we have this characteristic hook, this D-shaped outer rampart, and then 2 inner ramparts. And then the blowhole at the isthmus there has destroyed part of the main gate, we think, of Buckspool. Within the fort, we have a cluster of these rock-cut house platforms, these dimples in the fort interior. Very impressive sight, with sheer cliffs dropping to the sea all around. The middle photograph on the right shows a section of this rock-cut ditch at Buckspool. And that's so fresh. It's 2,000 years old, and it's still surviving very, very well. And we think there's traces potentially even of a medieval settlement incorporated in the ramparts at Buckspool. It's a complex site. We're looking at survival. The walling at Buckspool is still very fresh in places. This is prehistoric rampart walling made out of limestone blocks. But look how well it's preserved. It gives us a tangible look at the quality of the entrance ramparts here, as they would have been in the Iron Age. And using our drone, we can take a little flyover Buckspool. We have the outer ramparts in the foreground, then we're coming over, there's Louise working on the inner rampart with that walling surviving there, just see a figure there. And then lower left, we have the blowhole, which has partly destroyed some of the main gate. And then we're into the interior of the promontory fort. You can see white crosses on the ground so that we can locate our drone surveys later on. And then there's a figure there, that's Dan doing a survey of one of the rock-cut house platforms, working out where the edge of that platform is. And then we come to this great spur within the outcrop, within the interior, and then a sheer drop down to the blue seas of Pembrokeshire. So it's quite a sort of limited interior of Buckspool, but a very impressive site. One of the big sites we visited, the third site we came to, is Flintstone Bay Promontory Fort, one of the sort of big daddy of the Castlemartin range. And here we have a panoramic view from 2018 locating the site. So in the distance, we can see Linney Head Promontory Fort, that's where we started. In the middle distance, we have the Green Bridge of Wales, the Natural Arch, and the Legig Stacks, great places for nesting birds and climbing as well. And then the Flintstone Promontory Fort itself with the cauldron, this great chasm in the interior, which is a dangerous thing to have inside your coastal promontory fort, it must be said. Upper right, we can see Louise's survey from 2009, which has been a really valuable cross-check for how the site is changing. And lower right, one of these chasms within Flintstone Promontory Fort. It's absolutely laden with sheer cliff drops and gullies. It's an interesting place to walk around. So let's take a little fly over Flintstone Promontory Fort. Beautiful summer evening weather, not a breath of wind over the sea. And we're pulling back over the promontory fort now. You can see dropping down in front of us the cauldron, a Legig Stacks on our right in the distance. And then we're coming to the interior of the fort with dimples of many house platforms within from the Iron Age, and that curving track which gives access down to a limestone quay, which was used in the 19th and early 20th century. Coming over the cliff collapse on the left there, which I talked about at the start of the talk, and now we can see the proper defences of the promontory fort, this big curving outer defences of the promontory fort, partly damaged by limestone quarrying in recent centuries, but a very, very fine site, very interesting site to walk around and visit. The cauldron within the promontory fort is an interesting feature. It undoubtedly would have formed part of the interior even in Iron Age times. And it would have made horrendous sounds during storms. You'd have this crashing of waves, this echoing noise up it. And one wonders about the role of a great blowhole like this within a prehistoric place of settlement. And I suggest that, you know, this may have had a very important role inside the promontory fort, maybe even a place of ceremony or ritual inside the site. Perhaps even one of the main reasons that Flintstone Bay Promontory was enclosed in the Iron Age, to come and visit this great feature. Who knows? Were people sacrificed down here? You can't tell, but these are things we must think about. You know, this is a key feature of the interior and very perilous unless you enclosed it with a palisade or a fence at the time. We're able to get these new views looking down into it from a 6-meter photo pole with a GoPro on top. We can really experience peering over the edge of this dangerous chasm. Just down the coast from Flintstone Bay is Croxy Dam, another Iron Age promontory fort, but a very different type of site. Now, Croxy Dam is a single rampart enclosing a coastal outcrop with sheer drops just beyond. It's enclosed in a sort of natural amphitheatre, so you can't really see it from anywhere on the approach as you drop down into it. And we know from Fenton that a skeleton was even unearthed here. So it suggests that Croxy Dam is not necessarily a regular day-to-day settlement. It may have other functions to it. It's a very different sort of site. One thing we're thinking about with this type of site now is whether we have a distinct class of augmented coastal outcrops. These outcrops which are treated specially or treated differently around the West Wales coast. You see at the top, Dinas Mawr coastal promontory fort on Strumble Head in North Pembrokeshire is essentially a large towering outcrop with a minor wall enclosing it. There are a couple of house platforms within. And Dinas Mawr is very close in appearance to Trewyn Dinas promontory fort on near Land's End in Cornwall. Very similar site. A bit more work's been done at Trewyn Dinas, and we know that there were Bronze Age burials tucked into rock gullies. There's a rocking stone on the headland there as well, which was a very unusual feature. And many people feel that Trewyn Dinas is a ceremonial ritual place as well as a regular settlement in the Iron Age. And Croeso on the lower left does also seem to have parallels to Castlemartin and Ceredigion, another promontory fort, which is hidden away, tucked away in a sort of amphitheatre in the coast, very sheltered from all approaches, with a focus of a coastal outcrop. And it may be that we have a distinct class of sites here that weren't regular farms, they weren't defended villages as such, but they're places for people to go to practice ceremonies or carry out rituals. But these are things that we're still developing our thoughts on. I think there's a lot more to discover about the coastal promontory forts of Pembrokeshire from this new work. Return to the survey work that we did. Again, we had perfect weather in our week in August, which is very fortunate. The drone can only really get airborne if we've got winds less than 20 miles an hour. And over the course of a long day between Flintstone and Croeso, we surveyed 1.3 kilometres of coast with the drone in a unified new 3D model. And we can see that picture upper left of those individual drone pictures over Flintstone promontory there. Nearly 2,000 images that we stitched together in a computer, and that gives us this very, very detailed 3D photogrammetric model, a digital terrain model. And that model is being processed now by my colleague Dan. He's done a lot of hard work on this. And this is now a 2 centimetre accurate model of the whole coastline between Flintstone Bay and Croeso, of course, down on the lower right. See what a different site it is to Flintstone Promontory Fort. Now, previously, the best 3D data that we had for this part of Pembrokeshire was a 2004 airborne laser scanning survey with 2 meters accuracy, very fuzzy, available on the Clare portal there for all to see. But this new drone photogrammetry has given us a fantastically detailed map of these sites. We can start to look at the earthworks in more detail now, start to do more interpretation on the Iron Age sites. But also this is a very important model for future monitoring of cliff erosion, cliff collapse, and the speed and processes of change on these sites. And you can see even individual boulders and rocks on the beach. So it's an incredible way to do surveys. We have that 2009 survey of Flintstone Bay, so we're going to go back to that now and start to see if there's any immediate change. We know particularly where that our red circle is. We've lost about 5 meters of cliff line and a bit of rampart in that 2014 collapse. And now we're going to be able to archive this data. And if in 20 years or 30 years or 50 years time, we want to then go back to Flintstone Bay to see how it's changed, we'll have this metrically accurate 2 centimetre model. And that's what we're really trying to achieve with the Cherish project in this part of Wales. While we're doing field work on the South Pembrokeshire coast, we had the opportunity to check out a hunch, a possible new promontory fort that I'd spotted from the air at Crickmile down near Buckspool in 2018. And this is Crickmile Down. It does indeed look like a hidden coastal promontory fort. We have a narrow promontory going out to this high ridge. We have the remains of 2 ditches either side of the isthmus on this promontory with a narrow causeway crossing between those ditches and up onto the interior of Crickmile Down, where we have the footings of at least 1 or 2 potential stone buildings. It looks a lot, the earthworks aren't as well preserved here as we have at places like Buckspool and Flintstone. They seem much more eroded, and it may suggest this is an older promontory fort. It may be a later Bronze Age settlement site, 1,000 years older potentially than those at Flintstone and Buckspool and Linney. It is a little bit like that very eroded early phase enclosure within Linney Head as well. So we think we have a new promontory fort at Crickmile Down. We're pretty confident about it. But of course, without excavation, it's impossible to really tell and really be sure. While we're investigating Crickmile Down, it's sited on these steep sea cliffs. Looking down on a gully at one side, we noted a very well-built historic limestone wall below the new promontory fort. So we scrambled down to have a look at it, did some drone surveys of it. This wall is not exactly a new discovery. It's only potentially 100 years old or so. And it looks to be related to the coastal limestone industry. A lot of lime is being quarried on South Pembrokeshire coast and shipped down to Stepole Quay, the lime kilns there. But this ward is not noted on the county series mapping from the 19th century. There's no historic environment record for it as well at the moment, so it's been missed along the way, but it's incredibly well built. The only thing is, it's at the foot of a steep chasm bordering onto a beach full of massive boulders, so I can't imagine a lot of heavy work going on here, but they must have had some infrastructure here to shift limestone blocks off onto waiting ships. But a really interesting site, just tucked away in one of these little coastal chasms. So we had a very productive week on the Castlemartin Training Area, making brand new surveys of those important coastal promontory forts and beginning to develop new thoughts, new ideas about how people were living and working and trading on the coast in prehistoric and Roman times. And we're busy in other areas of the Cherish project as well. We're beginning to get out some of our case study work, our best practice work that we've been developing to show people what we've learned about working in the coast edge, what we've learned from drone surveys, laser scanning and monitoring coastal erosion to some of our most important heritage sites in Wales and Ireland. And we've started contributing as well to big policy documents. We had the Sector Adaptation Plan for Wales published in February 2020, and in there we have some case studies from our work, not only air photographs of Caerfai Promontory Fort upper right, but also some results of our excavations last year at Cenedlaethol Promontory Fort in North Wales. So the lessons we're learning by working in the coast, we're going to be sharing with the wider heritage community and the wider countryside community in the following year or two. So there's people I'd like to thank. It's a complex business getting permission to work in the coast edge in Pembrokeshire. We have to think about the wildlife. We have to think about the heritage. We have to work with the correct permissions, and particularly in the Castlemartin Training Area, we're working in a very potentially hazardous environment. It's a live firing range. And so we're very grateful to all our colleagues in Natural Resources Wales, CADU, the National Park and the Defence Infrastructure Organisation as well for helping us get out into the coast edge and do this new survey work. And don't we all wish we had that lovely hot summer sun back again in the depths of winter. So I hope that's been a useful, rapid overview of the work we're doing in South Pembrokeshire. You can look at our website and find out more information, or follow us on Facebook or Twitter. We had our latest issue 6 of our Cherish newsletter out in August, which you can download as well. And I hope you found that very interesting. Many thanks. Diolch yn fawr.
Brilliant, great stuff. Well, we're going to be joined by Toby later on for the Q&A, aren't we, Thomas? I did notice there was a couple of questions coming up in the comments and in the chat there, and I saw that Toby was actually taking the time to answer some of those. So I'm grateful that Toby's out there watching us, and look forward to speaking to you in a bit more detail about some of those issues that people have raised there, and a couple of other questions too later on.
I was just going to say, Stuart, Sophie, who's on the chat, has made a really good point that it's so nice that the talk is pre-recorded, so Toby doesn't have to multitask and try and respond whilst trying to watch as well. So that's really good. So thanks, Toby. We might come back to that question because others might want to hear about it later. And I've got a few points coming out, but yeah, fantastic. I mean, I've been here since last year, but I can see there's so much more I need to go and visit. What we're going to do now is we'll move on so we can stay on time, so that we hopefully will finish at 4 o'clock. We'll try our best. Felly, mae'r sgwrs nesaf ni yn edrych ar gwaith cloddio yn Capel St Patrick, Porthmawr. Yn y sgwrs mae Ken Murphy o'r Ymddiriedolaeth Archaeolegol Dyfed yn cymedni o gwmpas y safle, rhoi dipyn bach o hanes, a hefyd sôn am lle mae gwaith cloddio wedi cyrraedd ni erbyn hyn. Hefyd mae'n sôn amdan cyfeiriad yr ymchwil yn y dyfodol o gobaith. Wrth gwrs mae Covid yn cael effaith ar hyn. Felly, os mae gallu unrhyw cwestiynau i Ken, Dwi'n gobeithio fydd o'n ymuno ni bellach ymlaen y sesiwn fyw, a chi postiwch nhw ar YouTube, neu gyrwch nhw fewn i Archaeology at Pembrokeshire
Yeah, brilliant. So yes, as Thomas says, the next talk is looking at the excavation work at St Patrick's Chapel at White Sands, which is near St David's in North Pembrokeshire. Ken Murphy from Dyfed Archaeological Trust is going to take us around the site. This is the great thing about doing a virtual archaeology day is normally we'd be stood in a dark conference room, dark sort of theatre, no connection with actual real archaeology. With this, we can actually, I mean, I thought that Toby's talk was demonstrative of this, you know, with these amazing drone footage of these archaeological sites, and Ken's going to do the same now over in, well, virtually over in St David's. Should mention, of course, that all the talks today are pre-recorded, but Ken, like Toby, will be joining us later on for the Q&A. So please do post your questions in the comments bar there on YouTube, or if you'd rather use the email, we've got archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk for posting any questions for our speakers today for the live chat, which we're hoping will be at about, well, about 20 to 4. We're hoping that live Q&A will be. But for now, we've got Ken Murphy talking about St Patrick's Chapel in White Sands.
My name's Ken Murphy, the Dywrnod Archaeological Trust, and we're at White Sands Bay, St Patrick's Chapel, which we're standing on here. It's always been known about St Patrick's Chapel. There's nothing to see on the surface anymore. As you can see here, it's just a grassy mound next to the beach. Nothing particularly obvious to be any below ground remains. But it is a chapel thought to be dating the building itself, which is below ground, to the 11th, 12th century. But below that are earlier burials in an early cemetery, which we've always known about, but not done much about until I think it was 2014. And if you remember then, we had some very big storms, huge winter storms, and simply it took away part of the front edge of the chapel. About 10 years previous to that, the National Park, Pembrokeshire Coast National Park, had armoured the front with big boulders, and they were stripped away one night in one of the storms. I believe that they came straight back to the National Park the next day and put them all back again, and the next night they were just stripped off again. And at that point he said, well, you can't really just keep doing this, it's just not practical. And those storms did reveal quite a few burials, human remains, in the sand dune of the chapel itself. So at that point we decided we had to do something about it. We couldn't just let it sort of sit there and erode with human remains, bits of skull and so forth, fall onto the beach and fall onto visitors' heads. You see down there. So in 2014 we did first of all a small scale excavation just to see what was there, what survived, and quite clearly it was the preservation was quite extraordinary on the site. It is a wind-blown sand site, so the human remains, the bones, the skeletons are preserved in pretty much perfect condition. And also what was so surprising was that instead of just having what we call a flat cemetery with burials just spread across a wide area, they've been stacked up one on top of the other. So the sand accumulated over several hundred years and covered earlier burials. New ones were put in the ground, and other ones on top and on top and top, and so on. About 11 deep in total in places. We now know over about 200, 250 years, from about 800 AD round to about 1000, 1050 AD. The chapel itself, the stone-built chapel, which is below, actually you can see behind you there's a stone here. The site was excavated, or partly excavated, in 1924, and this stone sits over the altar of the chapel. The excavation then just concentrated on the stone-built chapel itself, not much else. So they just simply cleared out the rubble and stuff that was inside the chapel itself, and then just revealed the walls, and that was it, and then backfilled it. But they didn't look at the stuff that was below it, which is, in many ways is the more interesting remains archaeologically. So this is the altar of the chapel here, and the chapel itself extends not too far. It's a very, very small building, about 4 meters wide, about 12 meters long, so not big at all. And that was the last use of the site, was a stone-built chapel. Yeah. I say built, we think 12th, perhaps 12th, 13th century, perhaps a bit earlier. And that seemed to go into use until around about, we think, sometime in the early 16th century, where it just seems to be abandoned and just left to decay. And it does, from what we know from the excavation, it just seems that it was just left to fall apart. We had lots of roofing slate, bits of rubble all over the place, so it just slowly fell apart over several hundred years until 1924, when it was then excavated. And we suspect, but we don't know for certain, in 1924 the foundations were still visible on the surface, otherwise they wouldn't have known exactly where to excavate. Yes, it's one of many chapels in the parish of St David's, so they would have had very close connections with what's now the cathedral. At the time it probably served as not quite as a parish church, but as a place of worship if you couldn't get to the cathedral. But also, in addition to that, it would have been very much serving the seafaring community here. White Sands was the main port for St David's in the medieval period. It doesn't look like it now. It's like a big open beach, which it obviously is a big open beach. But we think 1,000 years ago the landscape was quite different. There's hints that there was a big storm beach out there and a small inlet, an estuary, just here by the side of the chapel. So a place where you could bring your boats in as a safe haven. So this chapel would have been probably the last place you would have gone to before setting off to sea, and the first place you would come to after returning. So quite an important part. Martin Haven's got a very nice crossing size stone there. It's found a few years ago. Indicates that perhaps there was some sort of ecclesiastical foundation there, perhaps a chapel there. We don't know where that is. St Justinian's chapel is just a few miles around the corner here, around the headland. Again, that's on quite an open cliff area, but again would have served the local community. And there's others around as well in the parish. But I think these little coastal chapels were fairly common in Wales until, it seems, into the 16th century. Not quite sure, and also common inland as well, in what are now quite large parishes. You have little outlying chapels, simply because the other parishes are too big. If you live on the outskirts of a parish, to actually walk to church and back again in one day would have been quite an effort. Yeah. So you visited a little local chapel. And for some reason, which you're not quite sure of, is that it looks around about the sort of late medieval period, 16th century, they were sort of abandoned, or many were abandoned, as this one was. Yeah. Yes, well, we've done 4 seasons of excavation so far, 3 weeks in each season, and the latest one was last year, 2019. So I hope to know 2 seasons' work, and it's been quite extraordinary the amount of information we've got out of this site. It really is quite dramatic, not just the reviewing the chapel itself, a stone-built chapel, but the really well preserved human remains and what we can do with those as well. And they're being looked at in Sheffield University by Dr Katie Hamer, of all sorts of analysis we can get out of those. So that's fantastic to have that sort of a collection of bones, as it were. It's unusual in Wales. In fact, it's not quite unique, but it's very unusual, because most of the soils in Wales generally are very acid. So if you just move a few, not even a few kilometres inland, a few 100 metres inland, you would find the soils are quite acid. Any bone in the ground there, whether it's human bone or animal bone or whatever, would just rot extremely quickly, and so you actually get no remains whatsoever being preserved. Here, perfect preservation. It's in this windblown sand. So that's one real bonus to this site, just how extraordinarily well it is preserved. And the other thing that we're really quite keen on doing in the next couple of seasons is actually investigating what lies below the cemetery itself. So that's about 2.5 metres down here. It's not 3 metres down below my feet here, is what's happened prior to this site becoming a cemetery. And there we've got, we know with a bit of work done so far, is some sort of settlement. We don't know exactly what it is yet, because we've only just got one little bit of it so far to look at. But that seems to be round about the year 750 to 800 that was in use, and as well as no actual direct settlement evidence in the form of houses. But what I've got is quite clearly bone, animal bone, which are being used, cooking animals and so forth, and birds. We've got evidence of metalworking, small industrial metalworking, so we've got little crucibles and also moulds for making some sort of jewellery or similar objects out of bronze. And rather interestingly, that those moulds are of objects which we can't match up with known objects we've found elsewhere in Wales. So we're making these little things which we don't know exactly what they are, because the moulds are quite fragmentary, but whatever they're making is things which we don't know elsewhere what they could be. So that's very unusual as well. They're also working amber. So getting amber from somewhere, presumably washed upon the beaches here. You do find it occasionally on the west coast of Britain. It's more common on the east coast than in the Baltic area, but you do get it here. And making, again, little bits of amber jewellery and so forth. And you can see where you finally sieve the soil and analyse it in great detail, you find that you get these little amber chips where they're scraping the amber to make presumably beads or similar bits of jewellery. So we've got that. So they're doing quite a few different things prior to cemetery actually coming into existence. Yeah. So very much a lot of the place names along the coast, North Pembrokeshire coast, are Norse names. And we have got, you don't get many artefacts apart from the stuff below the cemetery itself, which we've got those moulds and other stuff. But once you get into the cemetery itself, you don't get much in the way of artefacts, simply because these are Christian burials. So you don't bury people with grave goods, as it were. But we have got one very fine artefact, which is a bronze pin about so long, which is very distinctive and made in Dublin around about the year 1050. And Dublin is it's over that direction. So it's evidence of direct contact along this Irish Sea coast. And it's always worth bearing in mind, in fact, that travel up to very recently has been far, far easier along the sea than it was to go inland, far quicker. So it's probably far, far a bit quicker and easier to get from Dublin to here than it is to get, say, from here inland to like Carmarthen, which isn't too far away. You'd probably do it in half the time. The cemetery itself and the site is this mound of windblown sand, essentially. And the reason why it's a mound is because of all the burials in the ground. So essentially it's windblown sand came in, more burials put in the ground, more sand, more burials. And so it's roughly a circular mound which we're standing on, which in its final stage, when it would have been the stone-built chapel here, the mound would have been faced with a stone wall running around it. And out that way to the seaside, that stone wall has been taken away by the sea. So we know we've lost about, I think it's about 10 metres or so of the stone wall in its final stage out there. But what we don't know is how much further the cemetery extended beyond that. Some way, I would suspect, because we know on other sides that the earlier burials go out further than the mound. So we suspect that we've actually lost quite a lot of the cemetery out towards the sea. By projecting the stone wall around, how much we've lost of that. But actually how many human remains, how many burials have gone, we just don't know. It's impossible to say. It may have been, several hundred out that way, or it may have been 4 or 5. We just don't know. Yeah, so the cemetery itself, we now know through radiocarbon dating was in use from about 800 AD through to about 1050 or so. And then the chapel was built on top of that. But we are looking at, Katie Hamer from Sheffield University is looking at the human remains and analysing them in various different ways. And one way you can do is by isotopographic analysis, get an idea where people came from, where they were born and where they spent their early years of their life, and that was different from where they were buried. At the moment we haven't done that for this site at the moment, but we will do sometime in the next few years. But elsewhere that's been looked at, and Katie has analysed some other burials from other cemeteries on the Pembrokeshire coast, and it seems though a lot of people actually who were buried there were not local, so they come from various different places, not just in Wales or further across in Britain, but also from Ireland, which again not surprising, just across the water, but also even further afield, perhaps even from continental Europe or the Mediterranean area. So quite a wide input of people from different areas into the west coast of Britain at that period, which is quite unusual, well, not unusual, quite a startling piece of evidence which you wouldn't expect until that work was done. And the other thing that we can look at, which is being done at the moment as well, is looking at DNA and looking again at origins, but also family groupings of people buried here, what relations potentially there are between different individuals being buried here. So there's a whole variety of different analyses you can do now with human remains, which 20, 30 years ago you wouldn't even have considered possible. And there will be more in the future as well, which you can do. One of the big problems we have with this period, this what we call the early medieval period, is that we don't have a very good handle on where people lived. We have good evidence of where they buried, where they worshipped, and where the churches were, where the chapels were, and where the cemeteries were, and we can locate those without too much difficulty. But actually where people lived is a real problem to identify. So we don't have a really good idea of the landscape around here. Although looking across here at the moment, all these tents and caravans and things in the background now, and the field systems here, we do know that some of these fields are quite ancient. Perhaps not the ones looking at immediately here, but a bit further up the slope and towards St David's Head on the headland, there are some prehistoric fields there and some later fields as well. So we do know there were fields here, and so that means, obviously means agriculture taking place. And indeed on the remains below the cemetery excavated, we have got evidence of, as I said earlier, about bones of animals being cooked. So the usual stuff of sheep, pigs and cattle, which you expect to find, but also a variety of birds being consumed as well. Types of birds you wouldn't consider eating nowadays, but they were then. But also evidence of crops and cereal crops being cultivated. So again, oats, barley and wheat being used. Whether they're growing immediately here, we don't know, but certainly being consumed here. So we expect we've got like a mixed agricultural landscape behind us here on the hinterland, and presumably somewhere then some various settlements and farms scattered around, but quite where they are, you just can't pinpoint them at all. To be honest, it's a period we don't know an awful lot about. Well, most periods of Wales we don't know much about when it comes down to it, but yes, we are getting all these answers back constantly, which then, you say, raise new questions. So, I mean, the one about doing an isotopic analysis of where people were coming from, this is quite a diverse population, that's quite a stunning piece of evidence. So it wouldn't be, if you asked someone 20 years ago, where were the people who were buried here, where did they come from? You just said, oh, they're just local people, with perhaps a few seafarers as well. But now it doesn't look like that at all. Whether that picture would be replicated inland or not, we don't know, but certainly on the coastal sites, that seems to be the situation. We don't really know much about, say, settlements, what people were doing, how they got a living. We're getting little bits of bronze working, little bits of jewellery making, this sort of thing is quite interesting as well. So is that common? I mean, is that something which people would have done normally in their settlements, or is this a special site? This is an unusual site. So all these sort of things were as part of the bigger picture, which you add to, as you do more and more work, you get a better and better idea of what's going on. But it's just one little bit, and that's basically archaeology. You just add each time a bit more to the overall picture and build up this body of knowledge. So we are starting quite a low level still at the moment. Yeah, there's a variety of ages of people buried here. There's, not surprisingly, there's a very high child mortality rate, as there was until very recently in Western societies. And this is reflected in the burials here. Basically, it's a mixture of male and female. At the moment, there seems to be a greater number of females than males, but that might be because actually there's also just this area where you just can't identify the sex of some of the individuals. So if some of those are more male, then naturally it may even up a bit. But at the moment it looks like there's more females. But that's only a small sample of the whole cemetery. It's about 100 skeletons so far that have been analysed in detail. So it's still a relatively small sample to look at. As I say, there's a lot of children, a lot of they're young children buried here, which again is not surprising given the age of the cemetery. But it does seem as you come up into the last use of the cemetery, perhaps in the 11th century, it does seem to be almost exclusively children buried on the site. Whether that's because where we have been excavating is one particular area which is reserved for children, or whether actually the whole cemetery at that period was just reserved for children, we don't know at the moment. That's something we need to look at, and as we do a bit more work, it may become a bit clearer.
Brilliant. Great talk from Ken there at White Sands. On a foggy day, that was obviously out at White Sands, but still lots of people. And it's amazing that that site's there. And I think we all commented when that one came in, how amazing it is that there's this, this tremendously rich archaeological site under people's feet. And you kind of go there when, if you live in that part of Pembrokeshire, you go to White Sands and people are just there sort of eating their sandwiches, eating their picnics on the beach next to this this archaeological site, Thomas. Just wanted to quickly mention, I know we're going to introduce the next talk now, but lots of questions in the comments bar, lots and lots of questions. We are going to try and address all of them, or as many as we can, in the Q&A. I mean, there was quite a few coming in for Toby's talk that came before Ken's, lots of questions coming in for Ken's talk as well. We are going to try and address as many of them as we can with Ken, with the when we do the Q&A. The Q&A is scheduled for about 20 to 4, so that's about 3:40 thereabouts, depending on how the timings go. I've got to say, we're incredible. Dyfrnod Archaeological Trust have just started answering some in the comments. So I don't know if that's Ken or if that's Alice, but thank you for doing that. We'll try and cover them too when we actually speak, won't we, Thomas? But thank you also to Sophie, who's helping us with the comments. She's working tirelessly behind the scenes, in sort of almost invisibly. Her name, you'll see her name is appearing on the comments in the chat there, but she's working incredibly hard today in trying to field all of those inquiries and trying to kind of organise them in a fashion so that Tomos and I and the other contributors can kind of work around this discussion when the Q&A happens later on.
Yeah, it's brilliant to have so many questions, so thank you. And I know that Ken and Toby, so Toby started this off, I think, and now Ken has decided we'll try and respond as well. So thanks, Toby, for starting off, and thanks, Ken, for helping. But like Stuart said, we'll try and answer them so people can actually see that response. I have to say, it's interesting you mention the site, Stuart, and the conditions on the day. I was there with John when we did the filming, and it was quite busy because it was that time when lockdown was eased. Obviously, now that feels like a lifetime ago because obviously those restrictions are back in. So it'll be really interesting to hear from Ken, and also just keep sending those questions in, and we'll for those talks and for the next ones as well.
I was going to say, it's probably just worth mentioning, we're going to queue up the next talk now, a very interesting talk we've got coming up, but it's probably just worth mentioning, so anybody just joining us, obviously this is live, it's Archaeology Day 2020. Normally this is a face-to-face event that we hold at the college. Today it's virtual, it's through YouTube. Anybody watching this later, I mean, we're in the middle of the lockdown, so this is why it's a virtual event, isn't it? I'm actually working from the Plan Ed offices. Thomas, you're at home in Pembroke Dock. John, who's our technical assistant, he's at home in Langham here in Pembrokeshire. So we're all kind of having to be very socially distant while doing it. The films that were all made today were all done, obviously, under the strict, it's worth saying, just repeating, all the films were made sort of with observing all of the rules and regulations around travelling and around social distancing. So we just want to underline that if there were any questions or concerns around the making of those films. And that film, as you say, was made just after the first lockdown was eased. And obviously Pembrokeshire's a huge tourist economy. Lots of people then started to trickle into the county to come on holiday. And you can see on the beach, though, and I went to White Sands because I live not far from there, after that, and there were lots of visitors, but even the visitors were being very respectful of those social distancing rules, keeping their distance, and wonderful to see, and enabling obviously local economies to flourish. We're going to introduce the next one now. Do you want to make a start on that, Tomos?
Yeah, I'll do that so we can keep to schedule, Stuart. Felly, da ni'n symud ymlaen wan, a mae'r sgwrs nesaf hefo perthynas i ardal Capel St Patrick, da chi wedi clywed amdano yn y sgwrs mae newydd roed. A mae hwn yn lun â arteffactau ar ei gael ei darganfod yn ardal Porthmawr. A roedd o'n prosiect ar ei gael ei comisiynu gan Awdurdod y Parc Cenedlaethol i sganio un o'r arteffactau. A wedyn yn y ffilm, mae'r contractwyr ar ei wneud hyn, so Siôn a Steve o Ffarm Tinder, yn trafod am y broses o greu model digidol o gen arth o'r cyfnod cyn hanes. Eto, fel dyn ni sôn, unrhyw cwestiynau, pasiwch nhw ymlaen i ni ar YouTube neu trwy e-bost, a wnawn ni geisio ateb hynny.
Brilliant. Yeah. So this next presentation we've got coming up is it's in connection actually with the last one, in connection with St Patrick's Chapel. This is a project that was commissioned by the National Park, and it was to look at scanning an artifact that came up at White Sands. Not from that dig, I should hesitate to add. It's a completely different age. So from an archaeological perspective, the two finds aren't linked at all, just happens to be geographically similar.
Well, that would be interesting, Stuart, if they were. It would be interesting if there were bears roaming around in the medieval period. It
was, yeah. So this is a jaw of a bear that was found on the beach. And I know I spoke to Ken, spoke to a few other people about where this has come from. I'm sure the details are going to be revealed in this next film. So this is an organisation called Tinder Farm. Sean and Steve are delivering this talk, and they're going to talk about how they digitised this bear jaw. As we've mentioned multiple times before, if you've got any questions about the process, got any questions for Sean and Steve, one of them or both of them might be joining us for the Q&A, the live Q&A later on today. So please do pop a question in the comments bar on YouTube, or if you rather, send an email to archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. So let's have a look at the film.
I'm Sean Vickery, and I work with Steve Knight, and together we work together as Tinder Farm. And at the moment, we're looking at creating a virtual 3D representation of a bear mandible that was found at White Sands, and we think it's about 6,000 years old. So that involves, the process is known as photogrammetry. And it's something we've not done it before, so we're kind of really excited about going on a little creative journey to see how this process works. We both work, and we come together to work on projects that are kind of that we'll enjoy working on. Both Steve and I have different hats that we wear. I work as an artist, Steve works as a programmer, and I'm sure he'll tell you. But we work together on things that really fire us up.
The first thing that we did was go straight in there and do some practical tests with what we had to hand. In this case, it was our phones, our mobile phones, and some objects that we had in the studio. So there's a bunch of kind of photogrammetry apps that you can get for your mobile phones, which are really quite good for what they are. And we thought we'd just start with those because they were free and available, and we could kind of just get a feel for this overall process that we were going to explore. So, and they were quite useful in identifying problems that we would have when we stepped up the workflow. So the first thing that we noticed straight away was that these apps were much better for kind of using on larger objects than smaller ones. We also noticed that the way that we'd passed around the objects with the camera had generated lots of noisy backgrounds, and that had interfered with the model that we wanted to focus on. So the backgrounds almost welded themselves into the model. So that would have meant a lot of kind of post-production cleanup to separate the model that we wanted from the backgrounds. So although these were kind of quick, fast, cheap tests, we did actually start to narrow down the workflow of the software and the hardware that we were going to use. Rather than continue with our dune models, we decided that we'd try and find an object that more closely matched the bear mandible that we'd be using for the final project. And luckily, in my arts practice, I work a lot with found objects, and certainly a lot of kind of natural objects, including animal bones and skulls. which I use to build constructions that I animate using stop motion. So I have this kind of resource of lots of kind of boxes away and shelves in the attic of these kind of objects. So I went and had a rummage through those, and I found a small jaw, which I think comes from a fox, a small, just single jawbone. And we thought that this would give us the closest kind of approximation to texture and the reflective characteristics of the bear mandible. And so that if we use this small little jawbone in tests, then we could preempt and troubleshoot any problems before they arose on the day of shooting when we go and film the actual bear mandible.
So I'm Steve Knight. I work with Sean Vickery's Tinder Farm. I'm a software developer and tinkerer with hardware and Raspberry Pis and 3D printing and all that sort of stuff. So we've been doing this project to photogrammetry and scan the bear mandible. It's been an interesting process, and I think photogrammetry is a really flexible solution, so you can use it to scan kind of large areas, drone footage, buildings, rooms, things like that, but you can also use it for very kind of small objects as well. We had identified early on that the highest possible quality was needed in capture, so raw files from our Canon cameras were the best option. In terms of the photogrammetry processing, Meshram was chosen because it had really good reviews amongst the photogrammetry community, and also importantly, it's got a fairly accessible learning curve and it's open source, so it's free to use. Where possible, we were really keen to use open source and free software, keeping the workflow as DIY and low cost as possible, so that process would be available to everyone. We decided to build ourselves a lightbox to give us a controlled environment for the photography. We made this from some simple sheets of white foam board, some 3D printed corner brackets. On the top sheet, we placed several rows of white 12-volt LEDs. To get a smooth, infinite background, we used a roll of white paper designed for wide format printing and just cut sections off as we needed. This smooth background, combined with the diffuse white LED lighting, gave us the perfect conditions for the photography.
Using a light box really limits the camera movement around the object. You can no longer kind of get around behind it and shoot 360 degrees around the object. So we wanted to take that limitation and turn it to our advantage. And we thought a really good way of doing that was placing a turntable inside the light box. This has a kind of number of advantages. It avoids any messy or difficult background extraction because you've got the wonderfully clean interior of the light box. If you can shoot everything really well, that saves so much time in post-production. And we were constantly evaluating our process to kind of minimize that post-production time. We didn't want to do lots of lengthy kind of digital cleanup on the models. We wanted to shoot everything as in the best quality that we possibly could that worked seamlessly with our post-production process. Another advantage of course, of having the object on a turntable is that it keeps handling to a minimum. And with something like a prehistoric bear mandible, you don't want to keep picking it up and changing position all the time. When we sat down to evaluate the tests, we thought that this new workflow with the light box and the turntable worked so well that it really gave us confidence to go ahead and schedule a shoot of the bear mandible down in South Pembrokeshire. Actually getting hands-on with the mandible was wonderful. I'm currently making an animation for an arts project that looks at the submerged forest at White Sands, and I'll be using the 3D models we make within that. But there's something really magical about holding that jawbone in my hand. It really physically resonates, and it's incredibly evocative of place and time, almost kind of transporting you immediately back through thousands of years to that kind of forest on the coast. And I'm really interested in how we might be able to communicate those kind of feelings digitally, or whether it's possible to do that. One of the first steps was to mount the mandible onto the turntable. And I'm lucky in that I'm often animating very fragile objects as part of my arts practice. So I was able to bring some of those skills to this task. So I wired up the mandible with very soft, malleable wire that I normally use for building stop motion armatures. And that let us adjust the mandible's position and angle on the stand very accurately, but very easily with this animation wire.
So we had a fox's jawbone, and we kind of had done some tests on that. But that was very light and quite reflective. And smaller than the bare mandible. So when we saw the bare mandible, I picked it up and loads of sand fell out of it. So it's, you know, it's literally come kind of raw and ready from when it was picked up on the beach. And it's very dirty. Its patina is very dark, so it reflects the light in a different way. So we've done a number of passes kind of this morning that, and we're having problems with the computer, you know, takes a whole series of photographs around the object, and then it tries to map where those are taken from in three-dimensional space to build a mesh. And if it can't quite see the object, the detail in the object because the kind of surface is too dark, it's looking for things to track, you know, and looking for kind of things that it can follow as the camera moves around it. Then it loses it. So we kind of tested on the wrong kind of things. So we had to go on a learning curve today to kind of see how we could fix that problem. And we think we have, but my colleague Steve will tell you about that.
I had some interesting experiments because photogrammetry likes a varied and different texture to kind of locate itself where it is on the object for each of the camera shots. And parts of the bare mandible didn't have a lot of texture, so we've had to kind of add markers in, other things around it, so to help the software kind of locate itself, basically.
The software creates a virtual wire mesh of the object and wraps that in a texture map created from the photographs. It's really important to set up the software to generate the highest quality texture map you can for the best end results. The photogrammetry software will generate a digital model, but it doesn't have the tools to edit it any further. So we need to take that file into another 3D modeling program to clean it up. And we chose Blender to do this, which is a professional 3D modeling and render program that, again, is also free and open source.
One of the byproducts of the process is that Meshroom doesn't distinguish between the target object and any supports, markers, and bits of stray background that it may have captured. So in order to deal with this, we have to go into Blender and manually edit out those unwanted features. We had to pay careful attention to the removal of the wire supports from the final object. We found that editing the model with flat shading, as opposed to the texture map, let us see and smooth out those unwanted bumps much more easily. Although we had deleted all the unwanted modelling, the drawer is still using a large texture map that refers to the original photographs. So we needed to go in and edit this, removing all the unwanted details, otherwise we could be left with a much larger file than we needed, which would cause problems when we embedded it on a website. We had to be careful that we preserve the link between the model and its texture, so in Blender we unwrapped the mandible into a blank texture map. We then extracted just the texture we needed from the original map and fixed it into this blank template, preserving the alignment and texture detail so that when it's rewrapped around the mandible, it fits perfectly in place. The texture map still contained traces of the wires we used to support the mandible, so we needed to remove these and replace them with the correct texture. This involved working directly onto the 3D model in Blender using a photographic cloning brush.
Once the model is finished, we can export it from Blender in a variety of formats suitable for different uses. For example, as an STL file for 3D printing, or an OBJ file for using on the web or in other 3D applications. In order to present the object as an interactive model on a website, we wrote a small embeddable application based around the 3.js library. It was at this stage we brought the two separate mandible models together to recreate the jaw. We used reference photographs to give us the correct angle between the mandibles, and created an option for the user to view them separately or together at the touch of a button.
Wow, brilliant, brilliant work. Amazing, isn't it? I mean, I don't know, we wouldn't have imagined how kind of people are able to do this with the technology that's in their pockets. I mean, obviously there's a lot more work and a lot more detailed stuff that's gone into creating the final product there, but it's just amazing the advancements in technology. And I think somebody put a comment on the thread in YouTube that, you know, all of the talks this afternoon have demonstrated that with things like drones, mobile phones, you know, GPS, that we all have access to in theory now, and obviously these advancements are trickled down from the much bigger things like you know, lidar that archaeologists are using to kind of to understand landscapes. It's amazing the impact that technology is having on our practice these days. Again, we're going to try and cover all. Just to mention, we're going to try and cover all the questions and all the comments that are coming up in the chat a bit later on with the Q&A. The Q&A is still scheduled to be roughly at about 22:04. That's 3:40 thereabouts. We're going to have hopefully all of our presenters from this afternoon dialing in live to answer questions. So we've got one more talk. Tomos, you're going to say a little bit about that now.
Yeah, I'll introduce it. But I just wanted to say I was really amazed because obviously we commissioned that piece of work around that artifact, and hopefully we can actually look at developing that further. But it's just amazing to see how much detail goes into that. You know, the fact that they're having to remove the brackets out of, but hopefully if we have time in the live Q&A, John has kindly got the browser up so people can actually see where we're up to, because we're hoping to develop that further. But if we'll come back to that in the live Q&A anyway.
Yeah, well, perhaps almost at the end of the Q&A, you know, if you know, I'm happy to hang on for 5 extra minutes if our viewers want to hang on for 5 extra minutes, and obviously if the presenters want to hang on, we can have a look at it at the very end of the Q&A. Because it would be good to just to show people what the finished product looks like there at the end.
Absolutely. So I'll just introduce our last speaker. Felly, yn symud ymlaen i'r sgwrs olaf, mae athro Mike Parker Pearson o Prifysgol Coleg Llundain wedi bod yn cario allan ymchwil yn ardal y Preseli am nifer o flynyddoedd ynglŷn â archeoleg neolithig a'r cysylltiad rhwng safle Côr y Cewri a'r cerrig glas. Fel rhan o'i cyflwyniad, mi fydd Mike yn cymeryd ni o gwmpas un o'r safleoedd mae wedi bod yn ymchwilio, Waun Mawn. Felly eto, os mae gennych chi cwestiynau, postiwch nhw i YouTube neu gyrwch nhw i'n e-bost ni archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk.
Yeah, so this is the big headline act, isn't it? I think not to diminish any of the other talks today, but
I was just going to say that, Stuart. All the talks we've had today have been brilliant. This just adds to it, I think.
Yeah, I know a lot of people do get excited when Mike speaks at our events, though. So this is Mike Parker Pearson, Professor Mike Parker Pearson from UCL, who's been working on research in the Preseli area. Looking at Neolithic archaeology and some of the connections between that area, that geography, and Stonehenge. So, as part of this talk, Mike's going to be taking us around Waun Mawn, which is one of the archaeological sites. And as Thomas mentioned, all the contributors, and as we all just mentioned, the contributors will be joining us later on for the live Q&A.
Although it looks like Steve's already ready to join us, but I'm sure Steve can hear us. We're just going to show this video, and then we'll be ready then to do the live Q&A.
So yeah, we're just going to show this final video. So this, if you've got any questions for Mike for the Q&A or any other comments, please do pop them in the comments bar. We'll try and include as many of them as we can for the Q&A later on. If you don't want to use the comments bar, you can also email comments. We will check now. Archaeology@pembrokeshirecoast.org.uk. So here's Mike Parker Pearson.
Right, well, I'm Mike Parker Pearson from the Institute of Archaeology at UCL, University College London, and we're here on a splendid day at Waun Mawn. Waun Mawn is in the Preseli Hills of North Pembrokeshire, and as you can see behind me, it's the site of some standing stones. Well, actually only one still standing, the other three have fallen over. There's one there behind this one standing, and you can see another smaller one just poking out of the grass, and there's a fourth one just here behind the camera. Now, these were first recorded by the Royal Commission sometime around the First World War, and they reckoned that these might be part of what had once been a stone circle. Other archaeologists came up here and hummed and hawed. One of them was W.F. Grimes, Welsh archaeologist who later became director of the Institute of Archaeology in London, where I work. Peter Grimes, as his friends called him, wasn't terribly impressed with these. He said, well, could be a circle, but very probably not. And that's where it all was left until 2010, when I came here with a team of archaeologists from various universities after we'd been working in the Stonehenge landscape, excavating at Stonehenge and other sites. And we were interested in the bluestones. How had they got to Stonehenge? Where had they come from? At that point, the geologists Rob Ixer and Richard Bevins were just beginning to identify some of the specific sources of the bluestones here in Preseli. And we were wondering if they had actually been put up in a monument here before being taken to Stonehenge, if it was effectively the monument that was moved to Stonehenge rather than the individual stones. How else might people have known about these stones if they weren't in some impressive structure? So we looked at this site in 2010, we did some geophysics. They were very disappointing results. We couldn't find any other traces of sockets for stones that had been put up and taken away. So we lost heart. And we went off and we looked at other circular things in the landscape over the next, 6 or 7 years. We excavated 2 of the bluestone sources and discovered that they were indeed megalith quarries. One of them, right behind me, on the hillside there, beneath the plantation on the horizon, that is Carn Goedog. And that is where we think the majority of the spotted dolerite bluestones came from. And then down in the valley, amongst those green fields, there is Craig Rosavellin, where we know that at least 1, possibly 2 of the rhyolite pillars at Stonehenge originated. So we were interested to see if we could find such a site. We'd crossed this one off our list, and we looked at all sorts of other circular sites in the area, and they all turned out to be Bronze Age, Iron Age, or even later. What that did, though, was force us to come back here. And in 2017 and 2018, we carried out further geophysics and trial excavations. For the geophysics, we threw everything at it: magnetometry, earth resistance survey, magnetic induction, electromagnetic induction, and ground penetrating radar. Absolutely nothing. We couldn't understand why the results were so bad until our geophysicists looked at the quality of the sediments. And the difficulty we have on this upland terrain is that this is glacial drift, which is unfortunately neither conductive nor magnetic. So we were effectively wasting our time, but at least we tried it. What we found in 2017 was that by digging trenches beyond the arc, continuing the arc, we found a stone hole beyond the small stone there, and we found another one beyond the stone just here. And then in 2018, we excavated 5 main areas, main trenches, and what we found was a further 4 stone sockets. So we had 4 stones still here, 6 stones been put up but removed. The question was, where and when had they gone? Now, we knew that one of the difficult things to do with a stone circle like this was to date it. First of all, let's say a bit about the dimensions, because although its dimensions as a possible circle had been estimated first by the Royal Commission and then by Grimes, neither had realised that it was quite as big as it actually is, because we were able to pick up some of those stone sockets over there. Its diameter is a stunning 110 metres. That makes it the 3rd largest stone circle in Britain. Avebury's easily the biggest, 330 metres. Coming in second is Stanton Drew in Somerset at 113. And then third is here, Waun Mawn. So it's the largest stone circle in Wales. And it also, intriguingly, has exactly the same diameter as the encircling ditch around Stonehenge. Now, a question that's really important is, what date is it? Most stone circles that have been dated date to after Stonehenge, so sometime after Stonehenge's first phase at 3000 BC. So could we show whether it was earlier than Stonehenge? In other words, might it be possible that the reason there are so few stones here is because they were taken away to Stonehenge? Or were we going to discover that actually it was built after Stonehenge's first stage, and there, when the blue stones were first put up there? So, 2 classic ways of dating in archaeology. The first is well known, and it is radiocarbon dating. Now, in this acidic landscape, there's very little old carbon left in archaeological deposits. Bone and antler just don't survive. So you're thrown back on dating charcoal, because charcoal isn't destroyed in the acidic soils. Now, we've dated our quarry sites with charcoal. Unfortunately, people in the Neolithic had been lighting fires in those locations, so we could get reasonably sized pieces from their contexts, so we knew that they could date the context reasonably well. Here is a different matter, because although there was charcoal in the stone sockets, it was very, very small. And that presents us with a problem, because small stuff easily gets incorporated into later features. So if it's lying about the surface and someone digs a hole and fills it back in, the stuff that was in the turf line and so on, that's going to go back into the hole. Also, small stuff moves down the soil profile thanks to the action of earthworms. And amazingly, we found quite a lot of earthworms up here in these very difficult, in this very sparse vegetation. So that meant that we couldn't rely absolutely on the radiocarbon dates. They could give us a guide, but we had to be aware of residuality, in other words, much earlier stuff, and contamination, much later stuff. So we decided to use a second technique as well. And this is called optically stimulated luminescence. And this is a method where you extract sediment in complete darkness by hammering cores into the side of your stone socket. And then on extraction, in laboratory conditions, you open them up under infrared lighting, and you select out grains of quartz. Those grains of quartz are then fired at with a laser, which releases the remnant energy since they were last exposed to light. And just like radiocarbon, you can get a plus or minus, a probability range for each of your samples. We were able to date, about 5 of the different stone sockets, and the dates were all consistent, and they basically ranged from about 3,800 BC to 3,200 BC. So in other words, that's a good 200 years at the very latest before Stonehenge. Now, the radiocarbon dates we got, as we expected, the vast majority were Mesolithic. So these are from a landscape that was presumably being cleared in the millennia before the arrival of farmers and agriculture at 4000 BC. And then we had, 4 Neolithic radiocarbon dates, broadly from about 36 to 3000 BC. And then nothing. A complete blank in dates for the next 1,000 years. Now that's interesting because it's broadly in those next 1,000 years that it seems that most of Britain's stone circles were built in the late Neolithic into the early Bronze Age. Now that established that yes, the circle was put up very possibly before 3200 BC, but probably not much earlier than that. That makes it quite possibly the earliest stone circle in Britain. There's one in Cumbria called Long Meg and Her Daughters, which has an equivalently early radiocarbon date, so maybe it's first equals in terms of date. The big question then is, can we date when they removed the stones? And it's more difficult because you can't date a removal because you're dating a void. All you can do is date sediment in the emptied socket that has later accumulated after the stone has gone. And the great thing about these features was that we could see the imprints of the sockets extremely clearly. These great big heavy stones had actually made a kind of an imprint of their bottoms in the pits. So we could actually see exactly what sort of size and shape the base of the stone had been. So the sediment that accumulated in them, the OSL dating, showed that this had to happen sometime before 2000 BC, plus or minus a few hundred years. In other words, before the Bronze Age. So since the Neolithic is before the Bronze Age, I think there's a very good chance that these stones were removed to go to Stonehenge. We have one radiocarbon date that comes from one of these, from the fill of an emptied socket, and interestingly enough, that is right on 3000 BC, the very time that we know at Stonehenge that the Aubrey holes were constructed, and it is in those Aubrey holes that we are now convinced that the blue stones were first put up. So we're very excited about this because effectively we have the site, the important site. Now, what other features are there? Well, the stones that we're looking at that were left behind are all of unspotted dolerite. And that's one of the less common ones at Stonehenge. So out of the 43 blue stones from Preseli, only 3 are of unspotted, and somewhere around 28 or so are of the spotted dolerite. We were looking for chippings in the sockets, and one of them, right over on the far side of the circle, produced chippings, lots of them, and these are of unspotted dolerite just like these. We also had the basal imprint of the stone, and it compares very closely in size and shape to one of the uprights at Stonehenge. I think it's stone 62. So it's just possible that that stone originally stood over there. So how do we find out if there's a match? And of course, you know, the obvious thing would be to do a plaster cast. These days, you can do a plaster cast electronically. We have machines that basically, what are they called? Laser scanners. And of course, they will produce an image, and you can also do that very effectively with three-dimensional photography. So that you, what's called structure from motion, you can take pictures from many different angles, above, below, from the side, and so on, and then build a three-dimensional model of the impression. So that's been a very useful technique. Now, other aspects about the circle that are interesting is that over there, the small lying down stone, it's odd because it's quite small, but also when we found the socket next to it where it originally stood, the socket was actually aligned perpendicular to the arc of the circle, pointing, so the stone would have been put up actually pointing that way. So like a gun sight, effectively. And then 15 meters further round, there was another such socket. And these two sockets had that characteristic we didn't see in any of the others, that they're basically forming a gun sight in that direction. And we were lucky to be able to have on our team Professor Clive Ruggles, who is the specialist in archaeoastronomy, the world expert. And Clive was able to say, yes, of course, you can guess what direction lies beyond. That is, from the center of the circle, midsummer solstice sunrise. And there's another famous circle, the same diameter, the Stonehenge ditch, and the Stonehenge has its orientation similarly towards midsummer solstice sunrise. So the fact that they share the same size, the fact that they have the same solstitial alignment suggests that there must have been an intimate connection between these two monuments, this one coming before Stonehenge. It's becoming less and less likely that that's coincidence, that here we are in the land of the blue stones. The question now remaining, though, is, well, how many stones were there? And that's going to require more excavation. It looks like we've got gaps. So although we found a stone socket over here, there's a gap where there seem to have been none. Now, this is in fact quite regular with other stone circles in Britain. The one I've mentioned, Stanton Drew, another big circle in Scotland, the Ring of Brodgar on Orkney. There are often substantial gaps at various points. So it's possible that it's just a gappy circle. The other possibility is that it may never have been completed. And that raises intriguing possibilities. Also, we haven't got any trace of stone types other than the unspotted dolerite. And given that we've got spotted dolerite up there, rhyolite down there, and somewhere in that area, the various other Stonehenge bluestones, the volcanics, the sandstones, and so on. The possibility is twofold. If this didn't hold all of the stones, might there be a second stone circle? Because don't forget, during our excavations at Stonehenge, we found a second unknown stone circle down at the end of the Stonehenge Avenue beside the River Avon that we called Blue Stonehenge, which had held some 25 or so bluestones at the same time as the 56 in Stonehenge. So there is the possibility that there are more circles to be found. Bevins and Ix's recent work on the altar stone at Stonehenge has revealed that whilst it comes from Wales, it doesn't come from Pembrokeshire. It's actually from another county altogether, just inside Powys. And what they've discovered is that it can be matched broadly to the old red sand, the Devonian sandstones that we get in the area of Crickhowell and Abergavenny. So that suggests that it's very possible that this wasn't the only source for Stonehenge's bluestones, that actually they were accumulating quite probably from a number of monuments that extended as far as Crickhowell. The other intriguing possibility is that our dates for quarrying, particularly those at Carngoedog, the quarrying ends in exactly the same century as the bluestones go up at Stonehenge. So I'm wondering about another possibility, which is that while some of the stones may have come from this and maybe other stone circles, others may have actually come direct from the quarry, that they were contributing not just from existing monuments, but also from quarries. So let's get on to the big question. Why? We've talked a bit about the basics of how you do it and all. There's lots of interest about how they move them. And we're now wondering that since we're the north side of Preseli, it's not an easy route to go over the mountain and all the way down to Milford Haven. The fact that the altar stone is on the way along the A40 makes me wonder whether they were actually taking these as far as possible by land. And it's a massive undertaking. This would have involved not just the communities here, but people all along the way. This would have been years of preparation, not just the ropes, the food, but also clearing the route, actually making a viable route to drag the stones, and of course recruiting a labour force of thousands. You know, from my own experience working in megalith building societies like Madagascar, the problem is not enough people, the problem's too many people, because everybody wants to be part of it. So what's going on in Britain in the 30th century BC that makes them do this extraordinary thing? And I think one of the things that's really interesting is that Stonehenge's location in that part of Salisbury Plain, that was already a major focus of monuments and ceremonial gatherings. And it's one of several that run basically north to south from the Thames Valley to the south coast. And in those earlier centuries, it seems to have been on something of a cultural watershed. To the west, you've got people using different pottery types to those to the east. And there are variations in the tomb types as well. So that long barrows are more an Eastern English thing, whereas dolmens we find in the southwest as well as in Wales. So it may have actually been on a political boundary between territorial groups, and you know, the whole point, I think, of actually bringing stones from here in one way would actually serve to coalesce what would have been different cultural groupings. We're getting some very interesting new results from ancient DNA, which shows that there are differences in the DNA of people in the Neolithic living in Wales to people living in southeast England. Yes, so on a gorgeous afternoon like this, it's hard to remember just how bad it was. When we packed up in 2018, we were facing 55-mile-an-hour winds and driving rain. It was like trying to work on the surface of some planet in a distant part of the galaxy. It was certainly not Earth as I recall it.
Right. Yes. Brilliant. Brilliant. So we're just, thank you very much for that amazing presentation, Mike. I mean, Tomos and I were both there when we filmed that up on Waun Mawn. We're joined now by, I'm just looking around the table, joined by our panelists for the Q&A. I'm just trying to see if there's anybody missing. We haven't got Toby yet. So Toby, I know Toby is active on the comments. So I know
Toby's going to, I think, Stuart, I think Toby's going to try and dial in. I think he was watching the YouTube, so there's a delay. So he's probably now trying to dial in. That's the problem with the YouTube. There's a 36 seconds delay or something.
Listen, Thomas, we said it's a great thing that normally when you're at a conference, the speaker can only be speaking. But with this setup that we've got, we've got the pre-recorded talks, and then the speaker is actively responding to comments in the chat. And there's some really interesting dialogues going on, and there's all sorts of people. I mean, I can't too much to kind of go through it, but all sorts of people that are obviously really inspired and amazed and there's a lot of appreciation in that comments bar for all of the work that's been going on. So it's just really good to see the dialogue and the conversations taking place out there. So we're now going to go to the Q&A. Thomas, did you want to just do a quick introduction for that, and then we'll see if I think Toby is, as I say, Toby is in the process of dialing in. I think.
That's fine. So da ni wedi dod i diwedd y sgwrsiau fel mae Stuart wedi sôn. Felly, da ni fyswn ni'n hoffi croesawu ein cyfranwyr i'r pnawn. Yn anffodus, mae Toby, dwi'n meddwl, wrach yn trio dailio fewn, diom di cyrraedd eto, ond be fedrwn ni'n neud ydy just croesawu a cyflwyno y pobl sydd yma'n barod. So, Stuart.
Yeah, so we've got, I think what we'll do is we'll sort of do a very quick introduction as to who we've got here this afternoon, and just to kind of and then I think the way Thomas and I had a quick chat whilst Mike's presentation was on about how we're going to try and handle it, because there are a few sort of questions. Some of them have been answered, some of them not, but we're going to try and kind of get through as many as we can. If the panelists are happy to sort of to hang on for as long as they can, we're going to try and just answer as many. And some of the questions might be quite basic, but we said from the very start, people that are asking these questions, they might not be academic archaeologists, they might not be technical specialists in any sense. There might be some quite straightforward questions that may have been answered in one way or another already, but just to try and kind of clarify and draw it all together. If our presenters and speakers are happy just to try and kind of go through some of the minutiae of some of the points that have been raised. So I'm just going to sort of go around the screen, as it were, just for everybody to introduce themselves. So first I've got Mike. Do you want to just introduce yourself, Mike?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Mike Parker Pearson, Professor of British Later Prehistory at UCL, University College London. And this is the result of how many years? 9 years of working in Preseli since 2011. So we're very pleased that it's gone so well and that we've had such fantastic support from the community and everybody involved.
Brilliant, thank you, Mike. So there's lots of questions coming in for you, so we'll come to this in just a minute. I've got Sean on my screen. Do you want to just quickly introduce yourself, Sean?
Hi there, I'm Sean Vickery. I'm one half of Tinder Farm. I work as an artist and work with kind of new media as well.
Brilliant, thank you, Sean. Yeah, lots of comments, sort of amazed at the kind of the work you were doing with that. And I think your colleague Steve is also with us. So Steve, just a quick introduction from you as well.
Yeah, I'm Steve Knight. So I'm a software engineer and tech nerd and tinkerer, generally speaking. And I work with Sean at Tinder Farm, doing a range of kind of interesting sort of tech and arts-based projects.
Brilliant. And I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing, as somebody mentioned in the chat, about this kind of mixture of art and science and archaeology and all this kind of multidisciplinary stuff. And I'm sure organizations, companies like yours have got to be so adaptive to kind of so many different applications of the technology that you use, working within the field of heritage and archaeology, but also I'm sure there are so many other applications for the sorts of work that you're doing. So I'll be really fascinated to hear a little bit more about all of that stuff. We're also joined at the moment where we've got Ken Murphy from Dyfed Archaeological Trust. Now, at the moment, Ken's camera isn't on, but Ken, if you are there, it'd be great if you could just do a quick introduction. So we've got no sound or vision from Ken.
Possibly some technical issues.
Possibly, and we're still not joined by Toby just yet. I know, as I say, we do know Toby's around because he is responding to some of the comments.
He's probably just very busy, still responding to those YouTube questions.
Well, look, I tell you what, Thomas, did you want to start with Sean and Steve are both here. I know you've got a few questions and comments regarding the bear mandible and that process. Did you want to just sort of come on to those first, and we'll kind of work our way through?
Yeah, so I'll give them a go. So the actual a specific question that's come in, it's actually come from the Archaeological Trust, and it's one probably for me to answer. So the question that they've asked is, is there any trace of the rest of the skeleton? Well, I've had a look, and we have got what looks like, obviously I haven't confirmed, but it looks like it's connected, the atlas, or it's the upper spine of the bear. So we've got one fragment of the spine as well. I can't recall if we've got any further, but we've also got other, which DAPT will be aware of, other material, and some of those stuff. So we've got we've got an aurochs horn. We're hoping maybe we're going to have discussions with Sean and Steve and see what else we can sort of scan. So fingers crossed we can do a bit further on that. One thing I was wondering, Sean and Steve, oh, there's Ken. I don't know if you want to, do you want to introduce Ken, Stuart?
Brilliant. Yeah. So thanks, Ken, for joining us. We were just in the middle. We just started some of the questions regarding the bear mandible presentation that we had earlier on. But Ken has now joined us. Ken, do you want to just very quickly introduce yourself, and we'll come on to some questions around White Sands in just a moment.
Yeah, well, as I should say really, I'm Ken Murphy, Director of Diwrnod Archaeoleg Trust. There we are, really. That's all we need to know, I think.
Brilliant. Short but
nice
sweet.
and simple.
Yes.
So just going back to Sean and Steve, what I was hoping, and I think John's got it loaded up, was just to show, I know he showed making that scanning, but I wonder whether John could just quickly just put up on a browser and show what it currently looks like.
So this is all the hard work. Thomas, I didn't know as well. I mean, I can't remember how much detail was in the video there. The question was about the rest of the skeleton. Did you want to sort of talk a little bit about the circumstances under which the mandible was found? Because I believe it was it washed up? Is that right?
So basically, which happens which is quite common, is it was after the 2014 storm, which is actually connected to the St. Patrick's Chapel work, actually, because they undertook work as a result of. So basically, it was exposed, and a finder he came across it. He's the one who also found the oryx horn and some other finds as well.
And this, I mean, you know, trying to sort of take a bit of the point of view. If you're not an archaeologist, you might not be aware that species like bear, you know, these feel like quite exotic species for the British Isles. I mean, obviously, in the archaeological record, especially that sort of Mesolithic, Paleolithic. And prior to that, there were quite a lot of what we might consider to be exotic species roaming the British Isles, or what was the landmass that now makes up the British Isles, wasn't there? I mean, so we still got at that time Mesolithic. So roughly how long ago is Mesolithic, just to kind of put a time on that?
So as they said, you know, it's you know, I think it's, well, the others can correct me here, but it's from sort of, I think it's from 10,000 years before present up until, is it about 6,000 years before present? Yeah, so Mike is nodding. So as Mike has agreed, clearly I'm right there.
Yeah, good. So that's the last glacial period, isn't it, Tomos? So yeah, the last glacial period finished about 10,000 years ago, what archaeologists refer to as the Holocene. Good, Mike's still nodding. So my undergraduate degree serving me well, very good. One thing, Stuart, one thing I was going to point out was it could be Mesolithic because, you know, bears were still present at that time, but it could be earlier as well. There's no definitive date on it. We'd have to do, you know, analysis on it to confirm the date. One of the things that was suggested, I mean, this is a completely side topic, and I suppose it's just of interest to me, perhaps, is that actually that this is part of the kind of the lost landscapes, these kind of underwater, what are now underwater, but these landscapes that are out at sea, as it were, in the kind of the lost landscapes that exist beyond the coast of areas like Pembrokeshire. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the archaeological press and around heritage around what we call Doggerland, this area, sort of when we get obviously the ice caps had a lot of water retained in them. As that ice cap melts, these areas become inundated. So this is the same on this side of the country, isn't it? Where we've got these kind of lost landscapes where this material is potentially being washed in from. Is that right?
Yeah. So we've got along the coastline, you've got that submerged landscape, and as the sea level rises, you start to lose that. Yeah, that's right. I can see we got Toby in. So I don't know if Toby wants to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. How's not fascinating afternoon? I think you're right.
Toby, you've been so busy responding to chat that you didn't have the time to dial in.
Oh, well, you said, oh, sorry, I thought it was going to be recommended at the end of the talk, so I've missed 20 minutes, have I? Sorry.
No, not at all, not at all.
I basically did a mic talk and then dialed in, so there we are.
I know, I was just making the point that you were really helpful. You were responding to questions.
I burst the bubble, didn't I? I responded to a question while I was talking, so I burst the illusion.
We said, actually, Toby, how useful it is at a conference. The speaker doesn't normally get the chance to answer questions simultaneously to making a presentation. So this is the great thing about being virtual. So we were just going through a few questions for Sean and Steve. Thomas, do you want to come back on to that one?
Yeah, so I was just sort of curious, really, Sean and Steve, what your thoughts? Do you feel that you've learned a lot from doing, the scanning of this artifact?
Go on, you go, Steve.
Yeah, I think personally it was a great learning experience for us. We have worked in 3D before, doing augmented reality projects, and I think this is it's a brilliant kind of thing to add to our kind of armory of skills, and I think also really interesting in light of what Sean does with his animation and kind of generating assets for that.
Okay, I'm actually getting a question in now, thanks to Sophie. She just sent one in, actually, from George Asquith. So he's just asking, how long would it take for the scanning, editing and technical magic to get to the final product of the mandible we have just seen on the screen?
Well, in this instance, it was a learning curve for us because we were straight up. We hadn't done any photogrammetry before, so this was a learning process for us. So it kind of built in a trial and error. So I think next time we do it, and there's definitely going to be a next time because it's kind of an incredibly. It was very enjoyable. I mean, what Steve and I do is we work independently on other things, but we come together on projects that we think we're going to enjoy. And when you asked us to do this, we said yes, because we thought, yeah, that sounds fantastic, and you can, hopefully that comes across in our enthusiasm for it. So we weren't as effective as we should have been because we hadn't done it before. So, and I think and we've talked about the other objects that you've got, like your oxhorn and things. And I think it's the timescale of how long it's going to take to take an object like that and end with it, from raw up on the website depends on the object itself, because there's kind of different scenarios for different objects in terms of how you can best capture them. I think you've also got an axe, haven't you? An axe head. And we talked about the material qualities of capturing of an axe head, which will be those incredibly detailed, flint facets, which is the pinnacle of that kind of technology for that time, which is going to be very important to capture. And that's a very different thing to capture than a jawbone. So again, if you're going to do that, then you've got to kind of take your time to take tests and find the best way of doing it. But really, I think once you're kind of up and running and honed, it shouldn't be that long. It should, it's about 5-6 days work, maybe, I think. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think I think the biggest challenge is how you manage the photography of the object, because different objects provide very different challenges in terms of like the complexity of the shape and how things are obscured by other parts of the model, and also objects that are highly reflective are also quite difficult to kind of photograph successfully. That's something we learned very early on.
Okay, thanks for that. There's so much more that I could ask, but I'm mindful that we've had several questions. I know we've had a response, but I wonder whether we should mix things up and kind of not go with the order of the talks. And maybe Stuart wants to do the next bit. So maybe you can ask Ken a few of those questions that come in.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just looking through the chat, looking for some of the stuff to do with Ken's talk, looking at YSANs. I mean, one of the questions that came in for Ken, and I know it was sort of dealt with in the chat, was around the abandonment of chapels, Ken. So I don't know if you wanted to expand. I know you did answer the question in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to sort of expand on that. I mean, obviously the White Sands Chapel, I'm trying to remember the dates from I've had so much today, but the dates from that were, you said about 800 AD to about just shortly after 1000 AD for that particular chapel.
Yeah, well, the cemetery itself was then the stone chapel was built on top, and that was abandoned. Well, there's only one reference to it about the year 1600, where it's described as being utterly ruined. So presumably sometime in the 1500s it was abandoned. And one of the questions was the Reformation, sort of the influencing abandonment, and the answer we just don't know. But there's a lot of rural chapels in Wales, and they do seem to be sort of beginning to be abandoned in the medieval period. just go out of use, and some survived until the 17th, 18th century. So I suspect the Reformation had some sort of impact to hasten the process, but it wasn't the beginning of the process, is all we can say.
Is this part of the same thing that, I mean, there is this phenomenon, and I don't know a lot of the details, so I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. This is the same phenomenon as you sort of get deserted medieval villages, don't you, that are roughly the same age? Is it the same sort of phenomenon that you see there in the archaeological records?
It's the same sort of thing in a way. The chapels are somewhat different. I mean, villages, again, they get abandoned at all times. I mean, the medieval ones are very well known, particularly in Midland England. But, you know, settlements get abandoned at all periods, basically. And chapels do as well. So, you know, once they've actually fulfilled their purpose, then they're just simply, you know, left and abandoned. What's strange about the St. Patrick's one is it does seem to have been just left. When you do the excavation, there's a lot of just roofing slate lying around, so it was abandoned and not deliberately demolished, and just slowly just collapsed on itself over perhaps a couple of centuries.
Brilliant. I was just sort of looking through the questions just to try and pick up where we are. So someone else was talking, because you obviously mentioned the bird species being consumed. And I know, again, there was a question that you kind of came round to. But I wanted to, perhaps, if you wanted to just talk a little bit more about what the evidence was for that diet.
Yeah, it's still at Sheffield University looking at the animal bones, and that's just a basic analysis done so far. But they seem to just predate the chapel itself. So the settlement site there, which is immediately, once abandoned, was transformed into a cemetery. So the animal bone comes from that. And it's a mixture of terrestrial animals, the usual stuff you expect to get: cattle, sheep, goats, etc. But also these quite a lot of bird bones. But of course, you can't be sure in that sort of environment where you're just getting bird bones which are just not being eaten, but just, you know, dying on the site or whatever, or being, you know, used as food. You just don't know at the moment. But there seems to be a lot of species there, which suggests, you know, they weren't just flying in and dying on the site without a coincidence. So they do seem to be eating these rather birds which you wouldn't consider eating nowadays. But
so was that all found as part of were these animal bones all found as sort of part of one assemblage? What was the kind of context for the find?
Big stuff. It's pre-cemetery stuff mostly, but then you find it, because of the nature of the site, the windblown sand building up over several hundred years, you find bits of bird bone, another bone all the way through the deposits, but they are just being disturbed from these early deposits. But mostly they are from the around about 800 AD is where the actual settlement seems to be dated to.
Brilliant. Somebody's asked here, Peter Stop in the chat, in the comments. He says, I recall a cross-carved stone being found there. Can Ken say anything more about that, please? So I don't know if that was something you wanted to address.
Yeah, we've got several scratch stones, I suppose you call them, which are mostly associated with graves. One was upright. Again, it's a marker stone around about, I think, 10th century, which is very unusual. In fact, I think it's the first time I actually found a stone of this date actually in situ as a grave marker. And it only survived simply because it was, once the grave was dug, it's set up right, and the sand just accumulated so quickly that it was covered over. Perhaps within a generation or so, it just disappeared from the landscape, so it was preserved. And the topless stone was damaged. So you can imagine the sort of top sticking out of the sand and being just kicked around a bit. But we have about, I think it's 6 now altogether, crossing size stones, and most of them actually on graves of children, as stone slabs over kiss graves, and just very lightly scratched into the surface of those slabs, which again is it's unusual evidence to get in full stop in Britain, to actually get in situ crosses on kiss graves. So it's a very good, they're no sort of, where they are known, they're usually just loose pieces of stone knocking around in churchyards or churches, and extremely difficult to date because they are quite simple. So actually to get these crosses with graves which you can date through radiocarbon is really quite something.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Ken. I suppose, obviously, a lot of people in Pembrokeshire will be familiar with the excavation at White Sands because it was quite well reported in the press. I remember that Western Telegraph, obviously, when you get kind of human remains in that context, and they were kind of, because they were, as you say, coming out the side of the sand dune there. It was something that was in the public imagination at the time, and I remember that the excavation there was something that was publicly accessible. I think, if I remember rightly, you had to sort of there was some way of booking. You had to sort of book to go and be taken on a tour of the excavation. Are there any other plans to make any of the findings of that sort of public in terms of any interpretation on the site or any exhibitions either in the national park or elsewhere?
Eventually, yes. I mean, there's quite a few reports and other bits of evidence on our website, and the national park through Tomos has got a really good reconstruction done of the chapel, which is fantastic. Which again, I think, is on the details on the website of what it may have looked like about 1100 or so. But yeah, we're looking at what we can do. We are looking to have 2 more seasons of work, 3 weeks each. We were hoping to be there this June, which obviously didn't happen. I was then hoping to go back in September, and that didn't happen again. Again, one of the problems with this, not one of the problems, but one of the good things to have about the site is that there are so many visitors to it. And we had someone just dedicated to showing people around, and we had 6,500 people we showed around last year during the 3 weeks excavation. And so one of the issues we had with this year, if you're going back in September, you saw on the video just how many people were on the beach, that would just be swamped with visitors, and we just couldn't do it this year, unfortunately. So we're hoping that to go back, I say provisionally, next March, April, for 3 weeks, then perhaps in June, for 3 weeks, to try and finish off. That is the plan at the moment. Whether that's going to happen or not is, who knows.
We shall see. Well, Fab, thanks, Ken. Yeah, I was going to say, I know.
Just to add, yes, I'll come on to that in a second with the time. I was just going to say that yes, we did commission some interpretation, and Ken kindly we consulted with him on that. And yeah, it is one of the things that you can see when we publicise this Archaeology Day. But the hope is we will update the interpretation panel site. I'm mindful that it's 4:08, and I do apologise. We seem to have done this again where we've overrun. And apologies to the contributors if you've got somewhere else you need to be. Fortunately, YouTube means that people can come back if they can't stay around for this. But hopefully, the contributors can just stay with us a little bit longer, just for us to ask a few more questions. That's my plea, anyway.
Yes, Thomas, do you want to come? I mean, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much for that, Ken. I think we'll come around now to Toby and Mike. Thomas, did you have a couple of questions for Toby?
Yeah, so obviously, Toby, you've answered most of the questions that have come in. So I just wondered whether you just want to reiterate the questions that you'd received. There's one about the blowhole and how you know it was there during the Iron Age.
Well, I think we've been doing quite a lot of work on coastal erosion over the last few years, and we did quite a lot actually with Ken and Marion back in 2008, 2009 as well. Coastal erosion isn't constant, and it's also highly variable. One of the big measures we have are the county series maps from about 1890, 1900, to show how much has been lost from some of these sites. So one could do a nominal calculation at places like Cyfle Promontory Fort near St David's, about 13 metres has been lost in the last century. But of course, some of those old maps are a little bit problematic in terms of their accuracy. And one of the reasons for going back now with the Cherish project is making these highly accurate maps that hopefully will be archived and available in 50 to 100 years if we need them, is to actually get some rigor in the coast zone. At the moment, it's very difficult to see where a cliff was in 1950, where it was in 1930, where it was in 1850. It's nearly impossible. But we do know, that things like limestone cliffs, you go to the Green Bridge of Wales, go to Flintstone, it all looks like it's falling to pieces. But actually, some of those cliffs haven't changed for decades or even centuries. And we can see with the Green Bridge collapse, I think these monuments can stay looking the way they are for a while, and then suddenly you have a catastrophic collapse. So long periods of stability and catastrophic collapses seem to characterise limestone coastlines. Whereas sites like Pentyrrau and Cyfle Promontory Forts near Solva and St David's clearly bits are dropping off all the time. But other bits are very, other parts of them may have been like that for many centuries. Clyde Promontory Fort was a huge chasm, huge hole of erosion, but actually in a rampart of the Iron Age Promontory Fort sits against that chasm. It doesn't look like it's ever eroded at all, so perhaps it was there when they built the rampart. So it's a variable process, but we do know, just to round off, that a lot of these coastal sites, one thinks it's the waves washing at the sites that's eroding them. But from a lot of the work we've been doing with Cherish, particularly at Dinas Dinlley in North Wales and other sites, the groundwater coming off these sites, especially in the last 2 or 3 decades, where we've had such intense rainfall, probably caused by climate change and more intensity of storms. If you have groundwater at these sites, it actually pushes the front of the cliff off. So and then that's mopped up and taken away by waves, which then yields more face for erosion. So it's a complex process, but we're steadily learning more about it.
Thanks, Toby. And then I'll just sort of combine the other 2 questions. So the 2 which I know you've answered, but just for the benefit of those who are watching. So from the existing data, can you reconstruct a model of how you think the fort looked like in the Iron Age? And the second one is around advice on discovering forts and settlements using drones to find key features.
Yeah, absolutely. I think reconstructing some of these sites is one of the best ways to bring them to life. Just as your St. Patrick's Chapel reconstruction has shown, I mean, you need to provide that vivid view of the past. As I said, some promontory forts around the coast probably haven't changed that much, actually, in the way that they've looked. Of course, you would have had stone walling to make them look much more impressive. They wouldn't have really been these grassy banks. But yeah, we have to push on with some nice reconstructions in the next couple of years with the Cherish project. And finally, looking for forts, prospecting for new sites. As I said in my answer, Google Earth is a really good resource still. It's full of air photography commissioned by the Welsh Government for Wales, and many, every 3 or 4 years. There's quite a lot of crop marks on the current Google Earth imagery for Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, captured in the 2018 drought. So do have a look. Drones are fantastic. Everybody's got them now. A lot of people are using them, but I always urge caution. Stay within the law if you can. Look at that excellent drone guidance in the national park. You don't want to be bothering pupping seals. You don't want your drone to crash in a town centre. Just use them sensibly, and I know a lot of people do. But they're great tools in the right hands. So yeah.
That's really good advice, Toby. And I don't know if you've heard of this research that I saw the other day that I think it's Southampton University are looking at using AI to have a look at LiDAR data, and then they try to find archaeological features. So that's interesting as well. AI is probably they're looking, a lot of people in Norway, people in Scotland now are looking at ways to crunch these volumes of data to look for artificial sites, built sites, archaeological monuments. Faster than a human can. So let's see how they get on. It'd be good. Yeah. Okay, Stuart. So maybe we can come on to Mike. But these poor contributors are, we said we'd finish at 4 and we're still running at 4:15. So apologies again.
On a Saturday as well.
I know.
It's a good job we're all in lockdown, haven't got anything else we're allowed to do at the moment. We are very grateful for your time. Mike, I've got quite a number of questions to come around to you, so we're very grateful if you can just have a look at some of these for you. There was one question sent in advance, and I'm going to look at that one first. And I think I was up with Tomos when we filmed the film you made up on Waun Mawn, and I think you acknowledged then that there's a little bit of, the theory that you put forward. There is a little bit of controversy around that. Not everybody is in agreement, let's say. So so this question is perhaps looking at an alternative point of view. So I thought let's tackle this head on. I mean, I know no better. It's not remotely my field of understanding of expertise. So perhaps you can kind of just clarify some of this for me. So the question that we got sent in advance is looking at is asking really about how can we prove that it's that the stones have been moved by people rather than by natural methods, essentially. I mean, what is it to say that it's not glacial flow or other geological natural processes that might be moving the stones from the Bluestone area, from the Preseli area to Salisbury Plain?
We've now got so much evidence that this is human that we really can dismiss that theory altogether. And basically, I think the key thing is that the chances of people quarrying at the actual spots where the bluestones came from at the time of Stonehenge makes it an outrageous coincidence if they'd actually already been moved there by to Salisbury Plain by ice. And yeah, I think we can just dispense with that one. And it's the fact that we have this extraordinary stone circle that just happens to be right next to the sources that dates to just before Stonehenge. It's just coincidence piling up on top of coincidence. No, I'm sorry, that boat doesn't float anymore.
Okay, that's well, it's useful just to kind of get that cleared up, Mike. I mean, you know, as I say, from somebody who's not my field of expertise, I mean, and obviously in those quarry areas, there is obviously archaeological evidence to demonstrate that the stone is being quarried from there, and presumably, you know, the kind of the potential uses of that beyond, I suppose, small scale local usage. You know, if we're thinking of where would that stone have been used, we can think, well, maybe local people were using it to build small monuments or houses or domestic or that sort of thing locally. But the only other kind of potential usage for that we can see in the archaeological record is, I mean, you know, how limited are we for those potential usages?
They're not using stones to build their houses.
Okay.
Neolithic houses are entirely out of wood in this part of the world, wood or soil or turf. So the only possible use is for standing stones or megalithic tombs. And yes, we do have a surprising number of those in the area, but they're not built out of the, most of the dolmens are actually slightly further down the Nevern. They're not built out of the spotted dolerite and the other stones that turned up at Stonehenge. So yeah, we can be entirely confident that they've been quarried at the time just before Stonehenge, and I think we would have found them in the locality if they had not moved.
And presumably, I mean, as I understand, there's good mineralogical matches between the quarry sites and the actual standing stones that we've got at present at Stonehenge right now.
Absolutely, and the great thing about the work that Rob Ixer and Richard Bevins did was to be able to pinpoint particular outcrops. At Craig Rosavellin, where we have one of the rhyolite types at Stonehenge, we can actually point to the precise spot on the outcrop where that particular type of rock originated. So there was actually so they were able to get a match thanks to the unique fingerprinting of different parts of the outcrop.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the other questions. There's lots of these are quite perhaps small questions that might not need as much detail, but so just going to quickly go through. So Emma Aldridge has asked a question on the chat there. Can you track the stones to Stonehenge by looking at their base profile from the sockets? Is what she asks. So.
Well, we can try, but I think that's going to take maybe a whole new research project to do that. One of the problems is that whilst we can look at the sockets where they sit just where the stone enters the earth, we can look at the shape of the stone at that point, and that's what we've been able to do with the stone that we think may match stone 62, because stone 62 is very unusual. It's not just a sort of rectangular profile or cut section. It's almost a sort of five-sided thing. So it provides a very unusual shape, which coincidentally is the same shape as in the stone socket that I was mentioning in the film. I think what's going to be interesting though for the future is that we know that there are up to 15 different kinds of bluestone found at Stonehenge, and the issue now, I think, is in the next few years, can we find the other sources either in the Preseli Hills or further to the east, like the altar stone? And I think there's real potential to actually identify the other quarries that are involved.
Well, that's an interesting point, because another question that we've got was around the idea, was around the idea of other communities and other places of origins, and it's sort of, I'm just having a look here. Yeah, could the assembly at Stonehenge, this is Peter Stopp's question, could the assembly at Stonehenge have been stones contributed by different communities as offerings? So yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting possibility. And it is intriguing as to why there are 4 stones left in that circle, why were they not all taken away? And it's a good job they weren't, because it would have been near impossible to actually locate that stone circle, because conventional geophysics just wouldn't produce anything at all. I do wonder if the reason stones were left behind there might have been because the particular community who'd been responsible for putting them up in the first place, that group were either not involved in the moving, or if in fact their descendants had died out, and so there was nobody that actually laid claim to them. I mean, there are various possibilities we can think of, but I think it's very likely that these stones had particular significance for different groups. We've been very struck by the fact that at both the outcrops we've excavated, where we have the quarries, that the Neolithic activity comes after a long sequence of activity going back thousands of years, not just in the Neolithic, but into hunter-gatherer times in the Mesolithic. So there's a good possibility that the outcrops themselves may have had a particular significance, which of course is long lost to us, and which people were kind of linked to as some sort of special ancestral or sacred places for them.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mike. Simon Banson's asked a question again in the chat about the nature of the stones at Waun Mawn. Were they dressed, or were they just sort of natural slabs that were taken and sort of put in the ground? What was the degree of work?
Since the first widespread excavations at Stonehenge in the 1920s, since then the archaeologists working there 100 years ago concluded that the stones were brought to Stonehenge undressed and were dressed subsequently. We've carried out laser scan analysis of the stones at Stonehenge. Now, less than half of the blue stones are actually dressed. Most of them are undressed, which people often forget. But the ones that are dressed in the same manner as one group of sarsens, the horseshoe of trilithons. That's the set of 5 double uprights with a lintel on top of them, and we know that they were put up long after 3000 BC, somewhere in the area of 2500 BC. So we think that it's likely that the dressing would have happened at that date, and we did indeed excavate dressing floors outside of Stonehenge where the sarsens were dressed. So my guess is that as in line with all of the other stone circles in Britain, that Waun Mawn wasn't dressed, and nor were the blue stones on arrival at Stonehenge, that it was only something that happened centuries later.
Right, that's fab. That's great. Thanks, Mike. Another sort of geological question that's come in. Linda Norris has asked about the old red sandstone that you mentioned. Did it come from Crickhowell area rather than St Bride's Bay?
Oh yes, this has been a major discovery by the geologists. It's long been thought that that this came from the Cosheston beds of Milford Haven, and this has really been a revolutionary discovery by our geologists to discover that actually it's sandstone of a different date. I believe it's an older date, that it's sandstone that comes from the Seni Formation, and that extends over much of South Wales. But they've also been able, by looking at the very fine composition of the stone, to actually, and it's to do with the proportions of kaolinite, they've been able to identify it as coming from the eastern part of the Seni Formation, which is broadly Crickhowell Abergavenny.
Okay, looking again, we've got I think 2 or 3 more questions, Mike. So we're nearly at the. It is a bit of a marathon Q&A, but I just want to make sure we kind of get as many as we can. So Clifton Jones has asked about the route that we think that the bluestones would have taken from the Preselles. He asks, could the bluestones have been taken across the land to the Usk, down the Usk, and then across to the Bristol Avon? And then he also asks a Crickhowell question. Also, do the Seni beds extend to Crickhowell? Is what he also. So there's two things in there about the route of the bluestones and then those Seni beds.
Yes, that's right. As I was saying, the eastern component of the Seni beds extends, in fact, well beyond Crickhowell and Abergavenny. So I think that's a really interesting possibility. Now that we don't have the altar stone in the Colchester beds, I think that's undermined the theory that Richard Atkinson and other archaeologists had during the 20th century, that they went on a raft by water. What I would suggest also, as I said in the video, is that it seems a crazy thing to start by going up and over the mountain before you even get going. Much easier to go around the side of the Preselles, and you basically follow the line of those glaciated valleys, and what is, as I remarked rather cheekily, along what is now the route of the A40. And that indeed will take you to Usk, and that is one route. That does mean that you are still facing quite a tricky journey across water, across the Severn Estuary, and then up the Bristol Avon before reaching anywhere near Salisbury Plain. So another possibility, just something that we know again from ethnographic observations on megalith building, is that you try and minimize risks, and anything to do with water and big stones is risky. So another possibility is that you actually continue your journey by land and you don't cross the Severn until you reach a suitable fording area, and then you come down from the north. So that would have been somewhere north of Gloucester, north of modern day Gloucester. But yes, I think that broad landward route to the east, to me, seems far more plausible.
It's interesting you say that, actually, because I mean, one imagines, you sort of think, oh, it's going to be far easier for them to travel to transport a stone by sea, just because we can imagine more easily a boat or a vessel carrying a large heavy stone. But as you say, the risk involved in that, if you spent this long transporting it so far, and then for whatever reason that stone comes off the boat or the boat sinks, you've lost all of that work that's gone there to date, haven't you?
Sure, exactly. I think to build the case for the other side, for the water transport side, we also have to remember that these Neolithic farmers were experienced sailors with thousands of years of sailing tradition behind them. We know from the DNA that their ancestors basically come from Anatolia through the Mediterranean. So basically land hopping as they went. And then from the Mediterranean, whether they came through around Iberia or through up the Rhone Valley and through France, we don't yet know. But then they have to make that coastal journey, bringing all of their domesticated animals in the boats with them. And of course, that event happens 1,000 years earlier, or probably a whole series of events of moving. So these were experienced sailors. They knew their way around the Atlantic waters.
Brilliant. We've got another question. Roger Bryan Smith has asked, obviously now we know that Stonehenge is part of this much broader ritual landscape in the Salisbury Plain area, and there's obviously lots and lots of different elements that make up that landscape, and lots of perhaps studies about kind of how concurrent that activity was happening in that prehistoric time. But obviously there are lots and lots of sites known about in the Stonehenge area. What is the evidence, or is there any evidence about Waun Mawn forming part of a similar wider ritual landscape across Pembrokeshire, across West Wales, as it would have been?
Yes, I mean, it's really only been in recent years that we've actually found out just how rich this area is. We've obviously known for a long time about the dense concentration of portal dolmens, particularly in the Lower Nevern. These are monuments that date to 700 years or so before Stonehenge, but work by Tim Darvill and the late Jeff Wainwright uncovered just about a mile to the southwest of Waun Mawn, a very unusual site for West Wales, a causewayed enclosure. These causewayed enclosures are particularly well known in the Stonehenge area in Salisbury Plain, throughout southern and eastern England. They're extremely rare in Wales. This is easily the furthest to the west. You have to pretty well go to Cardiff and the Severn Estuary to find the next ones. And so it's particularly interesting that it is right here in this location. Darwin and Wainwright were able to carry out a small excavation of it, and they discovered that yes, it does indeed date to to causewayed enclosure time, which is around 3700 BC, so same date as the Portal Dolmens. But interestingly, its ditch had been recut, so they come back and dug the ditch out in that magic date of the 30th century, 3000 BC, which is exactly the point that Stonehenge's Aubrey holes are constructed when we think the bluestones arrived there. And it's also the same date that we have the cessation of quarry activity at Carn Goedog. So and there's another discovery came up from Bayville, just to the north of the River Nevern, not far from Nevern itself. Again, Darwin and Wainwright discovered a palisaded enclosure of Neolithic date. So all of a sudden, what has seemed like a rather empty landscape has been quite dramatically filled up with these ceremonial monuments.
Brilliant. I'm just having a look. I think we've got one last couple of questions. Rowan, who was one of this morning's contributors, Thomas's colleague at the National Park, has asked a couple of questions. Just very quickly for you, Mike. She says she's interested in your comments about the landscape at Waun Mawn possibly having been cleared in the Mesolithic. Could you expand on why you think that? What's the evidence for that?
Yes, we did a very systematic and extensive radiocarbon dating program on the tiny pieces of charcoal that we recovered, and a very large proportion of them, the majority, are Mesolithic in date. So these indicate moments of burning which took place over 3,000 or 4,000 years from the early Neolithic onwards. Now, it's possible that you can get this sort of activity as the result of lightning strikes, but that's quite rare in the lightning strikes causing forest fires. That's quite rare in the rather damp, temperate conditions, shall we say, that the west of Britain experiences. So I think it's highly likely that, of course, they're up there, they're burning woodland, and we know that these are actually trees. They're particularly oak and hazel that's producing the charcoal.
So is that, do you think, as part of the landscape management practice that's going on, or is it a one-off event that's sort of to clear it out?
Well, yeah, I think what was quite interesting was we just plotted out the spatial distribution of the dates, and you do get clumps in different parts of the circle at different times. So to suggest that there might have been actually specific firing events in specific parts of that upland landscape. So yes, one possibility is that you're making clearings in light woodland up there in order to attract game, so that they'll come for the areas of pasture, of grass.
Brilliant. Rowan's last question, and I think might be one of the questions that we talked about when we were actually doing the filming. Rowan asks about palynology, what the pollen evidence was on the site and the other sites that you've looked at.
Yeah, well, this is something we're working on at the moment, is to actually get a pollen project together. We put in an application for a grant, but sadly didn't get it. It wasn't thought to be important enough. I think it's terribly important myself. And we have a palynologist from, in fact, who's based in Ireland, who's looking forward to doing this particular project. And once she is hopefully employed, if we can get a grant to do that, then I think we'll find out the sorts of vegetation that are in these upland areas. I mean, we have a fair idea from work done by Ralph Fife a few years ago, but not actually at Waun Mawn. The other thing I think that's really quite interesting is that we have evidence from the burial of people at Stonehenge that 4 of our 25 sampled individuals have strontium isotope values that are consistent with coming from this part of the world. They are exactly of the same date as the final bit of quarrying at Carn Goedog, and of the construction of the circle in the Aubrey Holes at Stonehenge. And that raises the possibility that people may have come with the stones, and that we might have the possibility of a major out-migration, not a complete one, but if that's the case, and one of the things that has struck me is how very few finds or radiocarbon dates we have for the late Neolithic in that part of North Pembrokeshire. So we have a massive dates in the Mesolithic and the Neolithic, and then they just fall off a cliff after 3000 BC. So it may well be that the pollen analysis will be able to show us what happens to the woodland. Does it regenerate? We can also look at other fungal spores that in pollen sequences that allow us to look at the amount of grazing that's going on. So of course, if people and their animals become absent from a region, then of course the fungal spores will decline in quantity.
That's amazing. I mean, Mike, I could talk to you for much, much longer. Time is ticking on, though. We've had, I think, all the questions. I'm just having a quick look at the chat. There's been lots and lots of chat in the comments on the live YouTube stream there. But I think we've just about covered as many of the questions that we can today. I'm incredibly grateful for everybody's time. We're over half an hour longer than we'd intended to be this afternoon, so we're really grateful that everyone's been able to stick around. The light outside is starting to dim, and we can see Mike, we're almost losing you in the darkness in there. Oh, there we are, lights come on. So it's been brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time this afternoon. We're incredibly grateful to everybody for all the time put into to making the films, the presentations. Mike came all the way to Pembrokeshire to film his, so that was brilliant. Obviously, everybody else has done a hell of a lot of work in preparing their material, pulling it all together. Our technical team behind the scenes, we've got John Newitt, who is the technical whiz that's pulled together everything that is necessary in all the editing of all the films and all the other bits and pieces. And we've got Sophie Jenkins, who's been incredibly busy trying to collate all the questions and the comments on the YouTube channel today, keeping an eye on everything and messaging us and keeping us all in check to make sure we're saying the right thing to the right people at the right time. So these things don't just happen. So there's a whole team behind the scenes sort of working away. So as I say, incredibly grateful for everybody. Thomas, was there anything else you wanted to finish off with before we sort of sign off at the end?
I just wanted to say there's so much to digest, and all of the talks today, both this afternoon and this morning, have been really interesting. And I think there's been some overlap between them as well in terms of the themes. But I just want to thank the contributors, both this morning and this afternoon, for just staying around. I know we've overrun by almost an hour. So, and apologies to the viewers, but at least the viewers who have had to dial out, they can come back and review. One thing that Sophie has asked us just to mention, because it's in the chat, is about people being able to view the session. So you can actually view the sessions on our channel, and Sophie will put the link on the chat. And you can also view the individual talks as well, if that's easy, if you're trying to get to a specific one.
I was going to mention that, Thomas. So yeah, so we're going to leave these. So the whole broadcast as it is going to stay up on the channel, and I can see we've still got 120 odd people that are watching us live, but they'll stay up there in perpetuity. That's brilliant. But then we're also going to put the individual presentations on as separate things. So if anybody wants to come back and just watch a particular presentation, they don't have to sort of pan through the whole of the afternoon's sort of all of the talks to find the one bit they were perhaps looking for or interested in. Those things are going to go on. I mean, we're going to have a big rest, I think, at the end of the day today, Thomas. But if you keep an eye on the channel over the next few days, we will try and make sure all those videos go live, so that you can sort of pick and choose the bits that people are interested in. We'd be really interested to see any further comments that come in. But no, once again, to finish off, thank you very much to everybody involved. Or just a message, all the videos are going live now. John, technical master that he is putting them all live as we speak. So no, big thank you to everybody. We shall let you all go, and it's been a brilliant day. Thank you all. Diolch yn fawr.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Good night.